Good evening. It's so wonderful to see you all here tonight. Thank you for attending the November 25th, 2024 meeting of the Westerville City School Boards of Education. This evening's agenda will be displayed on the screens in the front of the room. There's printed agendas on the back table or you may find the agenda on your mobile device by connecting to the district's website at www.wcsoh.org. You can click on our district link, select Board of Education, and follow the board docs link to our current meeting agenda. There will be two opportunities to address the board before it enters into a work session today. There are sign-up sheets located on the table in the back of the room. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the board. A timer will be shown on the screen. And with that, Ms. Marshall, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davidson?
Here.
Mrs. Levan?
Here.
Mrs. Valentine?
Here.
Mrs. Altman?
Here.
Mrs. Meyer?
Here. Would you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next up is the fun part of the evening, and I am going to turn it over to Ms. Altman and Ms. Lemon to introduce our A+ award winners.
Okay, let's make sure. All right. Thank you all for being here. It's such a beautiful evening. I'm sorry that you're missing such a lovely evening outside, but no, we're just really thrilled to have you here. The A+ Awards is one of our very favorite events, so thank you. The A+ Awards are presented twice each school year, in the fall and the spring, to employees who stand out for their exceptional performance. The selection committee evaluates nominees based on support for the district's mission, which is to prepare students to contribute to the competitive and changing world in which we live, their willingness to exceed expectations, and consistency with one or more of the district's core values: respect, inclusiveness, community, communication, collaboration, innovation, nurturing, trust, and accountability. This award has been given since 1984. And tonight we're excited to add more names to the list of staff members who exemplify the very best of our district for the last 40 years. So I'm going to pass it over after you.
Alrighty, well, let's kick things off. At this time, I would love to invite Mr. Tommy Brown to join us. So our first recipient of the evening has won the heart of many in our community. Nominated by 6 individuals for the A+ Awards, this person, Mr. Brown, shines with a clear and powerful theme: creating a safe, welcoming environment that reassures parents their children are in caring hands. One parent shared how he reassured her on the first day of school about her son's special needs, saying, "I got him, Mom. I'll keep him safe." Another parent shared how he went above and beyond to support her kindergartner, even taking time to reassure and build trust with their family. Other parents echoed similar sentiments, praising his dedication, kindness, and his ability to make every student feel respected and safe. His thoughtful, inclusive approach to his role creates a positive, nurturing environment for all of our kids. His commitment exemplifies what it means to go above and beyond, making him more than deserving of the A+ Awards. Congratulations to bus driver Tommy Brown. Thank you so much.
That is awesome. Thank you, Mr. Brown. All right, and then moving on to Minerva France Elementary School. We have one of our wonderful teachers, Molly Sparks, was nominated by parent Jasmine Hargo. Molly, would you please come on up? In her nomination, one parent wrote, "She loves and cares for her students. She builds relationships with each student, uses her skills to create an educational classroom, has emergency health snacks," thank you, "and stays after hours to build a better tomorrow. She deserves to be appreciated and recognized for her work, and we couldn't agree more. So congratulations to teacher Molly Sparks from Minerva France Elementary. Congratulations. Thank you so much.
Alrighty. Next, we have an amazing secretary coming from Robert Frost Elementary, Miss Melissa Fowler, who was nominated by her coworker, Amanda Anderson. Our next recipient is known for uplifting the spirit and morale of Robert Frost Elementary School. She consistently goes above and beyond in her role, organizing staff gatherings, placing motivational signs around the building, and turning rough days into moments of laughter and joy. A key player in implementing the new dismissal procedure at Robert Frost, she meticulously logged cars into the system and took the time to get to know each family and their unique dismissal routines. Quote, "With a smiling face, she continued to greet parents each afternoon and say goodbye to students. She knows their areas of strength and how to support their areas of need in a building with over 400 students. This is not an easy task. She has even taken on the role of wearing our school mascot costume, a falcon, at many events. Congratulations, Secretary Melissa Fowler."
And Genoa Middle School. Let's see, well, we have teacher coach Matt Yingling, who's also at South High School, nominated by student Lydia Thomas. Come on. Our next recipient is not just a teacher at one building, but also a coach at another. This student writes, "He's my golf coach at Westerville South, and he does such a great job with us. He's helped us improve so much over the span of just a few months. He gives so much of his time to us, and I think he's just a great teacher." This is a perfect example of the dedication and impact our educators and coaches have on their students. So congratulations to Genoa Middle School teacher Matt Yingling for his work with the Westerville South golf team. Congratulations.
All right, coming from North High School, we have teacher Bonnie Leonard, nominated by coworker Emily Berrigan. Our next recipient brings a calming presence to both staff and students alike. She offers a compassionate listening ear to students' concerns and is a steady source of support and camaraderie for her colleagues. Quote, "She is incredibly supportive of each student's unique and diverse backgrounds and makes it a point to make sure all students feel welcome. Please make her feel welcome tonight." Congratulations, Bonnie. Thank you.
And from South High School, we have teacher Shelley Coral, nominated by coworker Lauren Sefton. Ms. Coral? This next recipient is not only an incredible teacher, which my children can attest to, but also an invaluable presence for her students and her team. From her warm classroom decorated with motivational messages like "we can do hard things" and "practice makes progress," to her commitment to real-world learning is unmatched. She's made her labs practical and relevant, aligning with career-focused skills and ensuring they build on what students will encounter in the next level of their studies. She never takes the easy way out, constantly seeking ways to improve her lessons so that students are as prepared as possible. As a colleague, she's the backbone of her department, offering her wisdom and insight, always reminding us, is this in the best interest of our students? Thank you for asking that question always. So here's a quote. I've been blessed to work with her my entire career. I've been blessed because she's a phenomenal human being and educator. Her students arrive beyond prepared to succeed in rigorous courses. They come with growth mindsets, strong foundational knowledge, and most importantly, a love of science. So tonight we celebrate Shelley for her tireless work and her incredible dedications. Congratulations, and thank you for your work. Thank you so much.
And joining us from South High School, we have Sarah Detrick, nominated by student Maria Folk. And I apologize if I mispronounced her name. So our next recipient was nominated by a student, a true testament to her impact in the classroom. And here's a quote. She has been one of the most helpful teachers I have ever had. She works with you closely, step by step, to make sure you aren't behind and encourages you when you might be struggling. She always makes class fun and just always makes sure everyone in the classes has the resources to succeed. And that's exactly what the A+ award is all about. So congratulations. Thank you.
Also from South High School, we have teacher Justin Ferguson, who was nominated by parent Tara Sutherland. Yay, Mr. Ferguson. Our next recipient has made a remarkable impact on one Westerville family and their 3 children. Known for his thoughtfulness, responsiveness, and genuine care for students' needs, he goes above and beyond, even responding to emails late on a Friday when a college decision deadline was pressing. The quote is, "My oldest is a senior in college now, and because of him," that's right, "she's about to graduate from the school he suggested she visit when she was a senior. This school wasn't even on our radar, and she ended up getting an academic scholarship. Thank you for guiding students and families with such dedication and insight." Congratulations, Mr. Ferguson. Thank you for all you do.
And coming from South High School, we have teacher Rebecca Rollo, nominated by student Sydney. So our next recipient is a teacher who truly goes the extra mile for her students. Caring for them is not just academically, but also mentally, physically, and emotionally important. Her warmth and dedication to make everyone feel comfortable in her presence is admirable. Here's a quote. "When I missed the first week of school, she made me feel at ease knowing that I can catch up. She made me feel respected and gave me the confidence when she first met me. She is an A+ teacher, and we couldn't agree more. So congratulations."
And finally, from South High School, we have teacher Michael Spatafor. Come on up. There he is, behind me. Nominated by parent Trina Anthony. Our final recipient of the evening is known by a few different names, but the one he's most beloved for is simply Coach. This recipient embodies all 3 A+ award nomination categories, supporting the district's mission while offering invaluable guidance in both sports and life. One family shared a powerful story about the difference he made in their son's life. Quote, "Our son did not want to attend the game one evening due to feeling depressed. I texted Coach about what was going on and asked him to call. He called in mere seconds. He had our son get his game stuff together, and he came to pick him up to go to the middle school game prior to their game. Coach took that time to have a sincere and deep conversation with him. He explained the team was a family and that everyone from coaches to players care about him. This time and conversation with Coach turned our son's world around. He's thriving, happy, and finding passion in life, which includes lacrosse. We could never thank him enough for the difference he has made in our family's life. This story speaks to what Westerville City Schools is all about, teachers and coaches and staff who go above and beyond. So congratulations, Coach. Thank you for all that you do. Thanks. Congratulations to all our A+ award winners. Charlie, are we doing photos? Okay. So Charlie will be taking photos with the recipients. If you just want to follow Charlie Boss, thank you.
All right. So next up, we have the superintendent's comments. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Hamburg.
Great, thank you. I have 2 items tonight. I would like to start out on behalf of our team, expressing my gratitude to the Our Community, Our Schools Committee that worked on the November ballot issue. While there were many individuals who helped in those efforts, I would especially like to thank Larry Jenkins, the chair, Megan Venemeyer, who coordinated the social media, Molly Elston, the volunteer coordinator, Mark Davidson, the treasurer, Nick Gurich, who was in charge of fundraising, Ed and Tammy Bennett, Linda and John Bokris, Julie Colley, Diane Conley, Kevin and Lauren Hoffman, and Nancy McFarland. Again, I know there were others that helped, but those were some individuals who put in a lot of time on behalf of the ballot issue and our kids. We're very grateful for the countless hours that these individuals have invested in our students and our efforts to secure additional funding for our district. While the ballot issue was not successful, that does not change the amount of effort that the committee put forth. So again, I just wanted to give a big heartfelt thank you to all of those individuals and everybody that assisted. My other item tonight is in regards to food service, and it is a statement that we are required to make as a compliance piece. So I will just read that to you now. The state law of Ohio requires that each school district board of education adopt and enforce nutrition standards governing the types of food and beverages available for sale on the premises of its schools. Additionally, the board must specify the time and place each type of food or beverage is available for sale. The state also requires an annual report to the Board of Education stating compliance with state law. I am happy to report that the Westerville City Schools has adopted and is enforcing a nutrition standards policy that considers the requirements of ORC 3313.814 for the 2023-2024 school year and the 2024-2025 school year, and we will have a more formal presentation from our food services team at a future board meeting. That's all I have tonight. Does anyone have any questions for me? All right, thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have the 5-year forecast. Ms. Marshall. Yep.
It's not coming on. Huh? It's on? It's not lit up, okay. All right, that's good. Throwing something new at me all the time. All right, so as promised, I'm back with the November 5-year forecast. I have some pictures throughout this presentation, just for the sake of time, because this is a longer presentation. I'm not going to read about the pictures, but please take your time when you go back and look at this later and just kind of look at all the awesome things that our kids are doing throughout our school system. So the purpose of the financial forecast is that it is a valuable long-range planning tool. It serves as our basis to sign what's known as the 412 certificate. That's a special provision in the Ohio Revised Code. It's 5705.412. It's basically a certificate of available resources in order for us to enter into any multi-year contracts, approve any wage schedules, any annual appropriations measures, any contracts that are more than $500,000, and I think that's it. It's pretty much all of those things that we need for long-term planning in this. And so this is what we use for anything paid out of the general operating fund. So I want to make sure everybody understands that as we're looking at this. And this tool also provides a method for the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce and the State Auditor's Office to recognize if there are any financial difficulties for school districts. Requirements of the 5-year forecast, we have to file no later than November 30th. So with the board's approval tonight, I will be filing this tomorrow with the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce. And each year we have to update that no later than May 31st. There is an optional spring update that we can file anywhere between December 1st and March 31st. So that is an option as we're planning moving forward if we want to look at doing an updated forecast to be submitted before the May forecast. And it includes projections for the current year and then the next 4 fiscal years. And then it also includes 3 years of historical information for just 3 actual years of historical information. The forecast includes the general operating fund only, and I like to look at it in 3 separate sections. So lines 1.01 through 2.08 are all of our revenue lines, and then expenditures are lines 3.01 through 5.05. And then our balances and reserves, 6.01 is really the line that I keep an eye on. That's the difference between our revenues and our expenses, but that's the changes in our balances. Through 1501 is our balances. Just a reminder, as a school district, a public school district in Ohio, we operate on a fiscal year. Our fiscal year runs July 1st through June 30th of each year. We've had a lot of conversations about this, and I just wanted to make sure that I highlight what is the district's footprint. I got an email not too long ago asking why we were busing kids from Columbus to Westerville schools, and I just want to make sure everybody understands what Westerville City Schools' footprint is. So this is an outline. You can see how our boundaries are shaped there, and we cover much more than just the city of Westerville. We have Franklin County to our south and Delaware County, parts of Delaware County to our north. And then the city of Westerville is in both Franklin and Delaware County. They cross counties also. And then we have Genoa Township to the north, Plain Township, Blendon Township, City of Columbus, the village of Minerva Park, Sharon Township, all are parts of our school district. These have always been parts of our school district. The conversation about Columbus, us busing kids from Columbus City schools into Westerville schools is just absolutely not true. We do have areas where the city of Columbus has annexed that property into the city's boundaries, but it's always been part of our school district. So I just want to make sure that that's very clear for anybody that's not sure about that. And all homes within the Westerville City Schools footprint that you see here are and always have been residents of Westerville City Schools, and they pay the same property tax rate to the schools regardless of what political subdivision where they live, whether it's the city, the township, the village, or the county they're located. If they fall within those boundaries, they pay the same property tax rate to Westerville City Schools through the respective county auditor. And I just want to point out, I don't know if everybody realizes this, but that little portion up there is the city of Westerville. Still, it's the city of Westerville, but that is not in our school district. You can see how that they actually edge into Olentangy School District. I just thought that was interesting information. When we're looking at challenges for the current forecast, we're continually watching legislative changes, federal funding. We have expiring federal funds from COVID dollars and other things that I'd like to have a conversation about, and then state funding. We're always keeping an eye on that. I do want to mention that this is the best information that I have available to bring to you today, projections, and that's what we're basing projections on. It will most definitely change as we move forward. This is just a planning tool for us to look to the future. Changes from May to the forecast. When we look at our projections for fiscal year 2024 compared to our actuals, our expenditures came in $5 million under budget, so we're excited about that. And then when we're looking at our state foundation, as of our October #2 payment report, our average daily membership count is up by 114.46 students. I know nobody understands what a fractional student is, so I want to explain that just a little bit. We are funded based on the full-time equivalent of a student. So for example, a half-day kindergarten student would only be a 0.5 ADM. And so we have preschool students, special ed preschool in there. And then it's also based on students coming and going and the time that they're in the district. So, but overall, our funding, for the funding formula, we are up by 114.46 students. I should mention the state still does not fully fund us for the students that we have, so. This is a slide that I've had on every forecast presentation since the ESSER funds have been allocated. So we had 3 rounds, and the last bit of those expired September 30th, 2024. We had some expenses that we paid up to September of this year, and now all of those expenses have moved back to the general fund that we've discussed in the past as those funds have expired. This is just a snapshot of the forecast for our revenues, things we're looking at, property value increases in new construction. We have slight increases in property taxes, not much, but a little bit. Fair school funding formula is continuing, but still partially implemented in 2025. And we actually saw a decrease in 2025. I do want to mention that we're receiving a one-time reimbursement in fiscal year 25 for required stipends for our teachers as they're required to get professional development under the science of reading. That was a new requirement that the state put on us that we had to implement this year. And then interest revenue, we're keeping an eye on that. And then we have one-time E-rate funds that we're expected to receive in fiscal year 25. Overall, the makeup of our revenues for 24, we received about 64% from local property taxes, 27% from the state of Ohio, and 9% from other. This forecast projects 68% in property taxes, and 26% from the state and 6% in others in the last year of the forecast, fiscal year 29. This is just a snapshot of the projected local property taxes. The general property taxes are projected to be 62% of total revenues in fiscal year 25. We are estimating collection rates at about 99%, which is where we've been. And the last operating levy was approved by voters in 2019. The operating levy for this November was not approved by voters, so there's no additional revenue for that. And the 2023 reappraisals, I want to make sure everybody understands we only have a reappraisal or an update every 3rd year. So the 2023 reappraisals, that will continue to be around what our values are for 24 and 25 until we have an update in 26. And so that resulted in a 36% increase in values for residential and agricultural real property and a 16% increase for commercial and industrial. This is where I'm going to mention, I have a couple slides on this. House Bill 920 prevents revenue growth in property taxes for the school district on voted levies. And we did see a small increase on our inside millage, our unvoted amount, and from new construction. We'll see that if it's not abated or diverted. And then tangible personal property, public utility taxes are about 2%, and we have slight increases projected in here after a large decrease for this year, I should say. Oh, wait, I want to point out this picture. I just want to mention State Senator Andy Brenner visited our district back, it was last spring. I feel like it was like February, March timeframe, something like that. And we invited him in to let him know that what the state was doing to our local community in terms of making our property taxes higher in the local community and diverting funds away from our public schools to send up private schools that are completely unregulated in any way. So I do just want to make sure everybody understands that we continue to talk to our legislators about that. And I let him know I was going to be taking his picture and putting something out about this. I just want to make sure everybody understands what a mill is as we're talking about mills. A mill is just the unit of measurement used in determining the property tax rate. It's the same thing as property tax rate. So 1 mill is 1/1000th of a dollar, or $1 for every 1,000. And there's a whole calculation on how the math works, but that's what a mill is equal to. So inside millage, when we talk about mills, inside versus outside millage, inside millage is non-voted. It was established by the state constitution. There were 10 mills that were established by the state constitution that's divided up around overlapping entities. Our portion of that is 3.8 mills. that 3.8 mils stays the same, never changes. And then all other millage has to be voted on by the local taxpayers. And so that's known as outside millage. And then for outside millage, House Bill 920 prevents revenue from growing on voted levies by reducing the millage rates as values increase. And I'm sure you've seen this before. It's just a simple graph that shows as property values increase, tax rates decrease, which means the overall revenue that the school district receives remains generally unchanged on those voted levies. We do get some growth on new construction as long as it's not under abatement. So I just want to show a history of our property tax rates since 2016. So that top line there, I don't know how easy these colors are to see, but that's a green line up there up top. That is our full voted rate. And it does change a little bit because we have a substitute emergency levy that sort of changes as values change also. And then the next line down is our voted effective rate for commercial and industrial property. And this effective rate, the effective rate is the tax rate that you pay your property tax bill based on. So we don't pay based on the full voted rate, we pay on the effective rate. And then the next line down, the orange line, is the effective residential and agricultural rate. And then the next line down, that bottom line on the purple, that's that 3.8 mils, the inside millage. And you can see 3.8 mils has not changed at all since 2016. That stays the same. You can see that our effective millage has continued to decrease over the years. I do just want to mention we had a reappraisal in 2017. We had our triennial update in 2020 and another reappraisal this past 2023. So you can see we had a little bit of bump here. That was a 5.9 mil operating levy that was added in 2020. It was approved by voters in 2019. And even with adding the 5.9 mils, because it was coupled with a triennial update year, commercial property rates went up 1.3 mils, not 5.9, and residential property values went down by 1.2 mils with the triennial update. So that's the effect of House Bill 920 and how that works. And I just want to make sure everybody understands how those tax rates continue to decrease. So back in 2016, the property tax rate was 47.9 mils for residents. And then in 2023, it's about 30.5 mils for our general property. These are all general property taxes. The operating. I like to, any opportunity I get, to let people know that the state is shifting costs to homeowners and farmers away from businesses, away from the state. This is, Dr. Howard Fleeter had put together a very in-depth analysis of school funding over the last few decades. And this shows from 1975 to 2022, the school tax base for property taxes. And so you can see in 1975, our class 1 real estate, that is residential and agricultural, so homeowners and farmers. And then our class 2 is commercial property. And then we used to have, businesses used to pay on tangible personal property taxes, and the state phased that out in 2011. We received a reimbursement for a short period of time, and then they phased the reimbursement out on that tax. But you can see from 1975 to 2022, the tax base has been paid 20% more by homeowners and farmers than businesses. Then when we look at our state foundation funding and overall state funding, we have the Fair School Funding Plan that's been partially funded for fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25. That's our current biennium budget. And this plan is subject to every biennium budget process. So we'll be going through that in the spring for the next biennium budget cycle. And so for fiscal year 25, it's in law that we'll receive 67% of the calculated increase for 2025, And what that means is that the state is looking at what was our funding for 2021? What does the funding formula say that we should be receiving? What does it calculate in 2025? Whatever that difference is, we'll see 67% of that difference. And then I do just want to mention, if you look at the restricted grants and aid line, the 4.36 million to 4.99, it looks like we're seeing a slight increase in that, but that includes the $1.3 million in the reimbursement for the science of reading stipends that we are required to have our teachers do. So not additional funding. I just want to make sure that that is very clear. And then the state share of local property taxes, excuse me. This was formerly known as property tax allocations. And House Bill 33, that biennium budget, it's been I don't think it was the last one. It might have been the last one, wasn't it? They changed the name of that to be state share of local property taxes because the state legislature wanted to make sure everybody understood that that's what the state's paying on their behalf for property taxes. And these are direct payments from the state for property tax rollback and homestead exemptions. The rollback was eliminated on all new levies after 2013, which made every new property tax levy after 2013 automatically 12.5% more expensive for the local communities. And this forecast assumes that the allocation will remain throughout the forecast period. I do want to mention of that 14.43 million we're estimated to receive this year, about 13.2 million of that is rollback. The state continues to have conversations about eliminating that reimbursement to school districts. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware that that's always up for debate whenever the budget comes up. But this forecast does assume that they will not eliminate it. And we are looking at 3 biennium budget cycles throughout this forecast period. And I do want to mention, we do project if they continue implementing the Fair School Funding Plan, we will likely see another drop in our state share as those 2023 values will also be 2024 values, and it's a 3-year rolling average that they update every year. So we'll have 2 years of the higher values in that 3-year average going forward, and then all 3 years. And this is just a history of the Fair School Funding Plan. It started in the biennium 22 and 23. And so the idea was to phase it in over 6 years. So the first year, 17% of the increase, the second year, 23% of the increase. I do want to point out that in 2022 and 2023, what does it cost to educate a student, so what they were basing the formula off of, the base cost, was calculated based on 2018 cost data from school districts pulled from the state. And that stayed the same for both 22 and 23, both years of the biennium. While they kept that number the same, they continued to update our local wealth capacity number with our what our local community looks like for our ability to raise funds locally, but they left the base cost calculation the same. And then for 24, they based it off of 22, and 25, they are basing it off of 22 again. So we're still a couple years behind, a few years behind now, what the actual costs are. Do you have a question?
I do. Before you move on, do you mind if I ask a question now?
Sure, please go ahead.
If you would go back just one slide, so I just want to make sure I'm clear here. With the increased implementation of the Fair School Funding Plan, you know, we will see a decrease because of property value increases in our district. Mm-hmm. When the state does that, they are not assuming that our existing levies are going to cover that gap, right, because of House Bill 920. They are assuming that we will be able to raise additional funds through additional levies.
Yeah, so they look at our values, our local property values, and they look at our resident income.
Yep.
And they compare us to the rest of the public schools around the state. And they look at what is our ability to raise taxes at the local level. That is how the funding formula is designed, not whether we have or haven't raised those funds.
Right, and so there is an assumption that to continue funding our district at the same level, we will have to pass additional levies. And,
That's-
I mean,
yeah,
it's
that's-
built into that
Yeah, our only options to raise funds is to either, through property taxes or income taxes, all that need to be approved by the local community.
Yep, and I want to make sure that I was clear on that, because I think it's, when you look at the continued implementation of the Fair School Funding Plan and the decreases in state funding for our district because we're considered to be a high property wealth or relatively higher property wealth district, that does not mean there's an assumption that our existing levies that are on the books will cover our needs. It means they just believe we have the capacity to raise the funds we need.
Yeah, and that's
Through
why,
additional
that's
levies.
why the calculation is called local capacity.
Yep, great, thank you.
Great question. So as we're looking at the history of what is our state share, so it is a shared responsibility between the state of Ohio and the local public school district for the cost of education. And so our state share as late as 2021 was 43%. And in 2025, it dropped down, the current fiscal year, it's dropped down to 23%. So our community has seen a 20% drop in what the state says its share of funding for education is. I just like to keep this table going. I've been adding this up for a while now. This is our actual school foundation funding back to 2019. So unrestricted and restricted, you can see the changes. We had a couple of years in a biennium for student wellness and success funds. That was there. We had to account for it in a separate fund, but it's still part of the formula. Then that went away and they rolled it all into the new funding formula. But overall, in 2019, we were receiving about $46 million in total funding. What the state was calculating for our funding to be in 2019 was $58.3 million. So we were underfunded in 2019 by $12.3 million. I actually attended a hearing at the State House where I told the legislators that were listening that the state had never funded us for approximately 3,000 of our students based on the calculation that they had, and that I would like for them to fully fund our district. And I feel like I've had that same conversation every time I've gone up there. And so, but you can see the calculated funding and the actual funding. So overall, we've been underfunded by $57.9 million over that time period, just based on what the state says we should be funded. But at the same time, and mind you, this is what the state has calculated using the old cost inputs and all of the things, right? But at the same time, not only have they underfunded us, but they've also significantly reduced our funding from $46 million to this year we're projected to be at about $40.7 million in state funding. And I do have a note that we also have that $1.3 million in science of reading stipends. I just want to make sure it's very clear to everybody that is not part of our state foundation funding. That's not going to be part of any calculation going forward. It's a one-time that we have to put out this year. And just for a frame of reference, we received about $32.6 million in ESSER funds to help with the loss during COVID. And so it doesn't quite make up for the underfunded and decreased funding that we've seen from the state. I just want to put that out there. And I want to sort of clear this up. There was a 10TV article that came out like February or March of 24 that alluded to at least what everybody got from it that sent me emails and called me and asked me about this, was that Westerville Schools was going to receive $43.6 million more in funding from the state thanks to sports betting laws. And so I just want to make sure that's very clear that that is not additional funding. This is our actual payment report from fiscal year 2024. And you can see the $43.6 million is our total state support for that year. And as a matter of fact, if we look at what the foundation funding was funding us, we were calculated to be at $44 million. And we received $38.3 million. So again, not additional funding. The state has not given us additional funding, and we certainly are not seeing anything additional through sports betting. Just want to make sure that's clear. Okay, so while the state is not fully funding us and continues to decrease our funding, they're also funding private schools more and more and more as the years go on. Based on our October number 2 report, if you just take our total state funding, divide it by our average daily membership, which is the calculation the state does, we're funded about $2,972 per student. If I were a private school educating kids in kindergarten through 8th grade on an Ed Choice scholarship, I would get $6,166 per student. And if I were a private school educating kids in high school on an Ed Choice scholarship, I would receive $8,408 per student. This is just a line graph that kind of shows the trend in our funding and then the state's trend for sending money to private schools that are not regulated in any way, shape, or form. They're not subject to public records. They are not subject to the school report card, which I have a slide on that, or any of the academic or financial matters that we are subject to. Oh, here's my slide on the report card. This is a document. It's a 9-page document put together by the Legislative Services Commission. Legislative Services Commission is a nonpartisan office that informs the state legislature on policy and laws that they're planning to put out. And that's a link to the document if anybody's interested. But this is the state report card requirement. You can see the top there, it's statutory requirements. And then school districts, community schools, STEM schools, all public schools. And then we have chartered non-public schools and non-chartered non-public schools and homeschooling. And you can see the private schools, which are non-public schools, have no requirements for report cards. All right. So that's my soapbox on state funding. As we're looking at all of other revenues, so that line 1.061, we have some payments in lieu of taxes, Board of Revision settlements, interest revenue, tuition, student fees, and other miscellaneous receipts. I do want to have a conversation about interest rates just for a second. We are projected to collect about $7.4 million in interest revenue this year that goes into our general operating account. This forecast assumes that as our cash balance diminishes, that we will see a drop in that operating revenue portion down to $750,000 in fiscal year 29. So it's a pretty significant drop over a 5-year period. And you can see that as you're looking at these numbers going down. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. And we'll keep an eye on interest rates. We'll continue to invest to the best of our ability. I do think it's important for everybody to understand, like, as a public school district, we are limited by law in what we can invest in, and so we work to maximize our investments the best way we can within the law, what's allowed under law. And then all other financing sources, these are generally one-time receipts. They include things like Medicaid reimbursement, and then we have some therapists that are employed with us that provide some services to kiddos, and we're able to bill for Medicaid reimbursements through, if they're eligible, through that. And then we have a one-time E-rate grant that we're expected to receive about $1 million in fiscal year 25. That's from some infrastructure upgrades that our technology department did over the summer into this year. Revenue uncertainty. So this is the kinds of things that I lose sleep on a lot. So state funding, we saw cuts in 20 and 21, and we had a new funding formula in 22 and 23, not fully funded. 24 and 25, same funding formula, not fully funded, but then the state significantly reduced our funding in 25 compared to 24. We have new biennium budgets, 2 more after this one. And then the state, I can't emphasize this enough, every meeting I've been in for the last few months, the state is emphasizing that revenues at the state level are coming in under targeted projections since they cut the income tax as part of the last budget cycle. So I don't know why they're surprised by that, but they seem to be. And then rollback reimbursements continue to be up for debate during the budget cycles. And then property taxes, the economy, and then legislative changes. There was a committee, an Ohio Joint Committee on Property Tax Review and Reform. They're expected to put out some report about how we can change property taxes. And in the meantime, there's no shortage of bills that are sort of outstanding that would also alter property taxes and how they work. And lots of opportunities for new funding decreases and unfunded mandates in those lists. So keep an eye on all of those things. And now this is a snapshot of our projected expenditures, and we are expecting to increase expenditures annually. We've opened 2 new school buildings over the last couple of years. We have the ESSER funds, the expenditures that were paid out of the ESSER funds are coming back to the general fund. We have some staffing increases, and then in '24, we had a one-time transfer out for capital projects that was meant to be coupled with the bond issue that was on the ballot this past November. And this is just a makeup of our expenditures, actual for '24, projected in '29. When we look at personnel, so this is wages and salaries, really is personal services, and then employees' retirement and insurance benefits. So fiscal year '25 uses estimates from the district staffing plan, and that includes updates for special education, English learners, and other student supports. And then fiscal year '26 through '29 includes adding, based on average salaries, adding 5 certified FTE and 1.5 classified FTE on an annual basis. And then new staff we've had for '23 and '24 for the new buildings. And then medical insurance continues, we continue to see high claims utilization and just high costs for medical care. And we are self-insured, in case anybody's not aware of that. And then ESSER funds, you can see the amounts there that were provided to cover general fund expenditures that are all, the last part of that is returning to the general fund now. And then other expenditures, we have purchase services, materials and supplies, capital outlay, other objects, and operating transfers out. I do want to mention that everything that is projected for fiscal year 2025 is based on budgets that were approved at the beginning of the year. And so we are having conversations about current year budgets that we'll talk more about in the work session, but the forecast is based off of everyone's the beginning of the year budgets that we had. And we added the one-to-one initiative in the May 2024 forecast for fiscal year 2025. So we're also having conversations about that. And then operating transfers out going forward include, we have an ongoing transfer to our permanent improvement fund that is meant to build up a balance to cover turf replacement in the future. It's $65,000 a year. And we have ongoing transfers out at the end of the year for food service. So our food service fund is considered a federal fund, and it cannot hold negative lunch debt. So what we do is we do a transfer to cover any negative lunch balances at the end of the year, and then our general operating fund holds that negative debt, and then that debt gets applied to Power School, assessed as a fee for the parent to go on and pay it there. And we're continuing to see high inflation as we're looking at expenses going forward. And the expenditure uncertainty really doesn't change from presentation to presentation. We're continuing to keep an eye on all of those things. And so our overall snapshot, so the green line is our projected revenues, and then you can see we have 3 years of actual here too, and then the red line is our projected expenses, and then the blue line is our unreserved ending balance for our general operating account. We are projected to begin deficit spending this year specifically. So we had deficit spending last year because of the transfer that we did, the large transfer. But based on regular expenses over revenues, we are projected to be deficit spending this fiscal year. And this forecast assumes a negative $47 million unreserved fund balance deficit. So when we talk about certifying that 412 certificate that we talked about at the beginning of the meeting, right now we cannot certify any contracts past June 30 of 2028 that will be paid out of the general operating fund. So, because we have a negative balance in there. Just a note of when those ESSER funds expired. Okay. Excuse me. So that was a lot, I know, and I knew it was going to be a long presentation. Sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure everything was out there. And then I want the board to I just want to remind the board about our cash balance and reserves policy. I have just a couple of snippets out. This isn't the whole policy, it's just a couple of paragraphs I feel like we need to focus on. So in the interest of sound fiscal management, the board believes that the district should maintain an unreserved general fund cash balance equal to a minimum of 90 true days of normal operating expenses, and that will be the minimum benchmark for determining unreserved cash balance needs for each rolling year of the fiscal year in the 5-year forecast period. So we are not meeting that with this forecast currently. And so in the event that any published forecast shows a balance that fails to meet the criteria above, the board superintendent and treasurer will develop a plan to address the shortfall prior to the next 5-year forecast adoption cycle. And the plan will identify how we'll address that. And so, like I said, the next required adoption is by May 31st. But we do have that spring optional adoption that I can file anytime from December 1st to March 31st. So, and I would like to target getting the forecast updated by that March 31st optional update timeline. All right, I gotta read this one. So Blendon Middle School students dissected sheep brains in their medical detective class. I just love the face, like this is, anyway. All right, what questions do you have for me in this moment? And I will say, we've scheduled a work session for the end to go over some scenarios. But for right now, what questions do you have?
This is just a real detailed little question. Just a couple slides back when you look at how we can't sign contracts
Yeah.
after June 30th of 2028. So what impact does that have in terms of having to do a shorter contract length for certain purchase services? Does that impact our pricing?
Sometimes it does, yes.
So we might pay more,
Sometimes
potentially.
that is the case, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead. I'm curious, you mentioned that we are underfunded about 3,000 students that are not fully funded. Is that still the case today? Is it still 3,000?
I haven't looked at it. I just saw that the other day when I was looking at past work sessions, and I thought, and the interesting thing was too, I said we're funded about $3,000 per student at the time, and it's like we're still funded about $3,000 per student. Like, it's just interesting to me that has not changed, but sorry.
And then it's also true that as the state formula is updated, the formula funding is updated with
Yes.
more current numbers, that also means that private schools will get more funding
Yeah,
as well.
the Ed Choice voucher number was somehow tied to the base cost. Yeah.
Yeah, excuse me. Keeping in mind the revenue uncertainties, there was a couple slides back, I think it was changes in the balance. The blue line on that graphic, it represents how quickly the projected fund balance is going to be depleted. And I guess it's more of a comment, but when we think about the unrestricted fund balance, that 38.1 million in 2025 and the projected amount that will be in deficit in 47, what we're projecting in 2025, it really sounds like a substantial amount of money that the district can use, but it really isn't a lot, especially considering the outstanding needs of the district and the size of the district. And so I really just wanted to emphasize that it may seem like a lot of money, but that alone is going to be used up in a very, very quick amount of time. And so I just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah. Great comment. Thanks.
Just had a quick question, more of just wanting to clarify. So when you were talking about voted levies and property values and what homeowners are seeing in terms of their bills, so for any voted levy, even if the property value of my home, let's say, goes up by double, the schools are not going to see any increase in revenue based on that. Like, my amount that I'm paying is basically going to stay the same, even though my home value's doubled.
Well, so it depends on how your value changed compared to everyone else in the county in that same jurisdiction, right?
Okay.
So overall, the total pot that goes to the school, and I have a whole presentation on this too that glad to bring to the
I
board.
bet you do.
But the overall pot on those voted levies won't increase, the revenue won't increase that's coming to the school, but like you might see an increase, but your neighbor a couple streets away might see a decrease in their tax bill. And so
Okay.
I did always mention that the Franklin County Auditor had the data, I never did get it from the Delaware County Auditor, that during the 2023 reappraisal process, Westerville School District in Franklin County, 30% of homeowners saw a decrease in their tax bill as a result of the reappraisals. And it did happen. I've had some people tell me that they did see a decrease in their property tax bill, but it's just because of how much your value, and what I like to say is on average for just Franklin County, right, homeowners saw a 38% increase in their property values as a result of the reappraisal. So if your property value went up by 38%, the average, you likely didn't see much of a change in your tax bill. But if it went up more than the average, you saw a change.
Okay,
And
so it's
if
based on kind of the average in your area?
Yeah, it's how do you compare to the average, the overall average of how it changed.
Okay, great. That's a good clarification point. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Any other questions? All right, I'll see you in a few minutes.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, so next up, we have, may I have a motion to approve the regular board of meeting minutes held on Monday, October 28th, 2024.
So moved.
Second.
Any comments? Okay, will you call the vote?
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mrs. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Abstain.
Mrs. Leban,
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer.
Yes. Next up, we have public comments. I just want to remind everyone, the Board of Education welcomes public comment on educational issues of interest to our school community. The board does not discriminate based on the identity or viewpoint of the speaker during our public participation. However, the board president may limit comments that are obscene, abusive, or harassing. In an attempt to protect the privacy privacy interests of our students, the board asks that speakers not identify students by names during their comments. Persons having public complaints about district personnel, programming, or operations will be referred to the process set forth in Board Policy 9130. And finally, the board reminds speakers that their statements should be directed to the board as a whole and not to individual board members. Public comments offered at this point are on the agenda are reserved for comments relative to agenda items 7.01 to 11.04. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the board. A timer again will be shown on the screens, and Mr. Doran will call time when 5 minutes has elapsed. So our first speaker tonight is Mr. Doug Krinsky. Welcome.
Thank you. Now that the levy was defeated, since you say you're looking for feedback, here are some ideas. Just before I kick into this, talk about tax rates and tax dollars. The tax dollars are not going down. If anything, the tax dollars are going up due to the inside millage. So as much as I appreciate that presentation, I think everybody needs to understand tax dollars are not going down in the district. So number one, and I'm surprised this didn't appear on the 5-year projection, because I know at the forums we heard this, but the transfer back of the $30 million that was transferred out of the general operating fund does not appear to be being transferred back into the general operating fund, but I would suggest that we do that. Second thing is salaries and benefits. I appreciate that you've actually reduced a little bit in an attempt to lower the 5-year projection deficit, but it's not enough. It's not nearly enough. The public has spoken. Don't spend dollars you don't have. So when I look at the deficit, there's an easy way to fix that. The projections for the salaries and benefits are still at 31% and 44% increases, which are way too high. There's an absolute area for improvement to lower that and get it more in line. Also, when I look at the administrative expense and I compare that to other districts, you know, the socioeconomic excuse I heard last time about why our administrative expense is so high is not a good reason for having an inflated administrative expense. There's an opportunity there for $5 to $6 million per year to be pulled out of expenses for salaries and benefits. I would also offer an early retirement program for employees. They've done it in the past, it can be done again, and it would be a cost-saving measure. Another cost-saving measure would be to do a cost-sharing program with employees. If an employee can find a cost savings, share the expense with them and let them benefit from being innovative and coming up with a cheaper way to do something or a cheaper cost. The union contracts, they will be coming up, all 4 of them, and I would offer, instead of just offering the typical 2.6 to 2.7 increases with a $300 bonus, reduce that to, say, 1%, and then throw, here's a unique idea, a 1% bonus for every single employee in the district, contingent on all grades going up to a minimum standard level, say 70% pass rate. Every employee would be engaged in the whole process and would make everybody focused on one thing, getting the grade scores up, and then they get a bonus. The other thing is purchased materials, supplies, materials, capital outlay, and other objects in the 5-year projection next year are showing a 22% increase, $12 million. That, to me, in your work group, should be absolutely addressed and reduced. I don't think we all want to battle over another levy over the next 6 months. There's plenty of other things to be worried about and plenty of solutions that are on the table. I hope as a board you take the opportunity to listen to truly what the community, including myself, offer to the board as ideas for solutions. We don't need to go through another levy battle. There are solutions. Businesses, like 3 that I've been involved in, cycle up and down. There's always, always, always down cycles. You have to do something about that. What you do is you look to cut costs. It's an opportunity. I suggest take advantage of it. A couple other loose ends I'd like to offer. I hear there's going to be public comments potentially going from 5 to 3 minutes. There's no need to do that. Silencing the public by shortening their comments only serves to divide the community more. It's not about time, it's about control. Let the public have their few minutes every 2 weeks. Second item, I notice occasionally, and I don't go there every week, but there seems to be a lot of cars for sale on the Westerville North lot over the weekend. We're not a used car business. I think that needs to be eliminated and those cars need to be towed. I also would suggest we do term limits for the board. 2 terms of 5 years each, I think, would be more than enough for every board member to serve. The last thing is board member names. If a board member says or does something to me as a public official, they should be held accountable. And for us not to be able to use a board name, I think is absolutely ridiculous in the public comments section. It's just silly. We're all adults. Let's just be accountable, let's be professional, and allow that practice to occur. I suggest you change that policy. Thank you.
Next up, we have Jim Harrison. Welcome.
My name is James Harrison. I am a taxpayer, Westerville City School District. I'm also the National Director of the Natural Family Foundation. And if you ever wonder whether you're in the right place, you walk into a room and you see nothing but parents, children, grandparents. I'm in the right place, okay? And I want to thank you for bringing them all in for me tonight. I appreciate that. I wanted to talk a little bit about the levy, but you know what? I've been coming to school board meetings off and on for the past, I'll say 3 or 4 decades. I go back as far as when we used to say prayer before a school board meeting, which we apparently don't do anymore. And I might recommend that you consider doing that. There's talk about, the treasurer talked about private schools. And this school board seems to have, or school seems to have a problem with competition. Andy Brenner is also my representative. And I'm going to talk to Andy this week. I'm going to ask Andy a question. If he were a professor at a college And he had 3 choices for students. Public schooled, and he's paid on a commission basis only. And it's compared to what his fellow teachers do, but he gets to select the students. He can select public schooled students, private schooled students, or home schooled students. I wonder what Andy's going to answer and why he'd answer that way. I appreciate the work that you do, and I'd also say because of the levy, welcome to my world or our world, because we're having to live on less and still doing more. And I'm sure the school board can do the same. I thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. And again, thanks for bringing the families in. I really appreciate that.
Okay, that concludes the public comments. Moving along to financials, may I have a motion to approve the financial report and investments for October 2024?
So moved.
Second. Ms. Marshall?
Yes, thank you. So this month, we're going over October 31, 2024, month-end financial reports. So for our general fund, we had year-to-date receipts of $94.9 million and year-to-date expenditures of $73.6 million, and we ended with an unencumbered general fund balance of $171.2 million. For all funds, we had year-to-date receipts of $121.6 million, year-to-date expenditures of $104.2 million, and we ended with unencumbered total fund balance for all funds at $238.2 million. And that's what I have for you tonight.
Any questions or comments? Thank you.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Lieband?
Yes.
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes. And may I have a motion to approve the purchases in accordance with Ohio Revised Code
So
57?
moved.
Huh? Oh, 5705.41D1 in the Board Policy 6320.
So moved.
Second.
Will you talk to us about this too?
Yes, thank you again. So this is where we have what we call then and now purchase orders. This means we had a purchase order that was opened after an invoice date or of when goods or services were ordered or rendered. So we have one for the Franklin County Board of Developmental Disabilities from our special education department. And this is where we had a student that was incorrectly coded to another district, so we didn't have the billing for that. And then we had one for the Educational Service Center of Central Ohio, and this was due to timing. We had a previous purchase order open, but it wasn't enough to cover the full purchase. And then one for Meta Solutions, and this was missed just timing and opening the PO in July. It had been budgeted for. And then the City of Columbus Department of Public Utilities. This was from Minerva Park. The utilities were actually in the contractor's name, and when that didn't get switched over and it didn't get billed in time, so that's why we didn't have a purchase order open for that. But all have been budgeted for, and I do recommend the board's approval so we can get them paid.
Any comments or questions? Okay.
Mrs. Lieband?
Yes.
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes. And may I have a motion to approve the 5-year forecast as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Any further comments or questions? Okay.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Lieband?
Yes.
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes. And may I take the personal consent agenda as well? Okay. May I have a motion to approve the personal consent agenda 8.01 through 8.13? Oh, sorry, 8.14, my apologies.
So moved.
Second.
Welcome, Mr. Cooper.
Good evening, President Meyer, Vice President Altman, members of the board, Ms. Marshall, and Ms. Hamburg. Tonight's personnel consent agenda includes action items with regard to resignations, retirements, a termination of contract, leaves of absence, contract status changes, one-time pays, and other employment-related decisions. Additionally, we have one MOA with our OPC 719 union recommended for your approval. We have several staff members who have announced retirement on this evening's agenda. Teresa Wood with 28 years of service to our district. Michelle Burt with 25 years of service to our district. Deanna Kavickia, 23 years. Kathy Conley, 33 years. Tom Cook, 33 years. Susan Dune, 25 years. Lisa Fields, 26 years. Richard Heron, 12 years of service in Westerville. Amy Lawrence, 34 years of service. Julia Stout, 30 years. And Mary Jo Urano with 36 years of service in Westerville City Schools. If you want to total up all those numbers, it does equate to 305 years worth of wisdom and just service to our kids. So we are truly thankful for each of these staff members and certainly wish them the best in their years of retirement ahead. The MOA with our OPC 719 group removes the requirement for members of this union to retire within their first year of eligibility to be able to receive the retirement incentive. With the vast majority of these staff members being employed in an area of great need as bus drivers and van drivers, we would like to keep them as colleagues as long as we are able. At this time, I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Any questions or comments?
Just congratulations to all the retirees. That's a lot of years. We appreciate all of it.
Mr. Reeves may have a lesson for us from 17.
Sure he does. Anybody else? Okay.
Thank you.
Mrs. Slepian?
Yes.
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes. We have no old business, but for new business, we have a first reading on policy 0100, definitions, but I'm assuming you're just going to talk to us about all of these since I think your name is on all of them, correct?
I'd like to
Oh,
address.
almost all of them.
I'd like to address 1001 through 1017
Okay,
together.
great. Thank you.
Well, good evening, President Meyer, Vice President Altman, members of the board, Ms. Hamburg and Ms. Marshall. Presented here in items 1001 through 1017 are multiple policy revisions related to the district's bylaws and related policies that need to be addressed due to the bylaw changes. Neola is our policy vendor and advisor and has recommended these changes that are related to changes in the law, updated definitions, clarification of existing language and scope, remuneration of policy numbers, addition of new policy numbers, the consolidation of language from multiple policies, and the rescindment of those now superfluous related policies. Neola provided the district with these recommendations to clean up the organizational structure of the bylaw area of their policies and for legal compliance in October. This has been presented now the board with these voluminous policy changes for your consideration to be in place prior to the January organizational meeting. And so we only have 2 meetings between that time period, and so that's why you're seeing so many of them. But we do have time in between if there is any questions about the way any of the language has turned out or any recommendations for changes. If you have specific questions about those items, the first 17, I'd be happy to try and answer those right now.
Any questions or comments? Seem pretty straightforward. Okay.
Okay, now presented for your consideration are changes to policy 0169.1, public participation at board meetings, which is also a bylaw but should be considered separately from the others, considering the changes recommended. Public participation is not required at board meetings, but this board has always welcomed the opportunity to hear from our school community. Notable changes to this policy include defining those who are able to participate, the duration of public comments, and clarifications on the guidelines for the presiding officer during public participation portion of the meeting to ensure that our school community voices have an opportunity to be heard. Those who are eligible to participate in the public participation of a regular board meetings are those who are residents of the district, an employee of the district, a contractor who provides services to the district's students pursuant to a contract with the district, a parent or guardian of a student enrolled in the district, or a student enrolled in the district. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer those as well.
Go ahead.
So I'm sure we're all going to talk through this one. I understand why these changes are being suggested. I would like to consider a couple changes within here. H, I do think that all statements need to be directed to the entire board. I know it says presiding officer. I think that's, we're up here as one body, not one person, so that would be my suggestion there. I do not have a problem with 3 minutes, although a half hour for comments, that's like 10 speakers. I know that we can make changes in that. I think that puts everyone in an awkward spot, like, are they going to make changes or not? I'd like to hear what my colleagues think. I think that should personally be extended. We are here to listen. We serve the public. We are the voice of the public. So I would like to talk through that and hear what you guys think. And then I think there was somewhere in here about speaking about the same subject, right? Same topic? I think we need to talk through that because it might be the same topic, but different perspectives. Again, we are here to represent the public. So I think it's very beneficial to hear what people think. Just a couple of my comments.
Ms. Davidson, for clarification, are you speaking about item G at the top of page 2?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a question. I read that as G, right, as one person not coming up speaking about the same topic again, twice. Is that correct?
That is how I interpreted it as well.
Okay. Maybe we just need to
The
be a
language
little
might
bit more
not be
clear.
clear enough.
Yeah.
Oh,
Did you think it meant something different?
yep.
So,
Sorry.
So that's why discussion's good, right?
But we have had that before.
Mm-hmm.
We have had someone come up and speak 2 times
On the same topic,
on the same topic.
in one meeting.
Just recently. So I get that. I guess, let me read that again during the question.
I want to say that, I think the move from 5 minutes to 3, we ask our students to be succinct. I feel like if you can't say it in 3 minutes, you might not be able to say it in 5. So I think I don't have any problem with the time, reduction in time per speaker. I agree that 30 minutes seems a little bit short. So let's talk about that one. Yeah.
So, sorry, I do have a few things. I do want to acknowledge that, I do believe, to my colleague's point, that the board should be addressed as a whole. I understand that the purpose of it was to, if I'm remembering this correctly, allow the board president to facilitate just the actual the comments and versus individual comments to board members based on a whole slew of things. But I think we just need to clean up that language and really be thoughtful about what it is we're trying to accomplish there, and maybe we can have another conversation about what that language looks like once it's hammered out a bit more.
Sure.
And then I would agree, 3 minutes, even down at the State House, we are given 3 minutes. Our other districts are 3 minutes, and we do try to get people to be succinct. I'm fine. I agree. 30 minutes seems a bit short. I'm happy to continue to talk about that, too.
I have the same comment as my colleagues here. The 3 minutes seems perfectly fine. We're taught to do stump speeches in 2 minutes, which is even less, so 3 minutes should be plenty of time. I would be more comfortable with, 60 minutes or something like that being the duration, because like they had mentioned, if it's 3 minutes and everybody takes up their full 3 minutes, that's only 10 speakers for the entire session, and we want to make sure that enough people have a chance to be heard. My other question or thing that I would like to discuss is on, let's see, E. So when participants are coming up and stating their name and it asks them to state their address, I don't know that we should be having people state their address in this day and age publicly, just in case they have some unpopular viewpoints. If they need to put it on the piece of paper when they're registering to give comments, that's totally fine. But I think having to state that publicly in front of everybody and on a camera may open them up to some unwanted attention.
And for me, number D is very interesting. I would just ask that we could expand the language so that maybe we're including children or relatives that may be translating, or maybe doing something on behalf of a parent that is maybe aging, or, someone that may not be capable of signing up on their own. I know if my mom were here with me right now, I would probably sign her up on her behalf, and so I would just ask that we're thinking about inclusivity on that specific piece.
Can I just make a note about the address? So I just want to make sure, like, even if they don't say it at the microphone, it's still part of a public record document that could be requested under public record laws. I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that.
Yeah, I think that came up during, prior public comments, it got pretty heated and people were worried about being retaliated against. So as long as we're not broadcasting it to the world, I think that's a good point.
And it might be helpful to have just a note on our form stating that your address will be part of a public record,
Yeah.
like the public record.
And I'm sorry. And the reason why we're asking that is we really do want to hear from our residents and people, our employees that work here. Instead of people that are really just from all over Ohio or maybe out of the state even. It's really important that we get to hear from you guys and hear your viewpoints.
I just wanted to note that the address, I'm seeing it under both C and E. We called out E, but it's under both of those.
Thank you. Any other questions I can help with?
No, I'm just curious how my other colleagues feel about 60 minutes and still have this ability to vote if we wanted to extend it. Or do we just want to leave it open as they go back to try to work on all these different?
I'd be in favor of 60 minutes with the option that the board could vote to extend the time.
Do we have to have that written in there with the option to extend the time? Can't we just do that? Can we just put it at 60 minutes? How's that work?
I mean, you could always make a motion
Yeah.
anyway, but if it's, I think you could just, if it's not in the policy, if it's silent on, I think somebody could still make a motion to, you think, Nicole, or not?
I think there's no requirement for public comments under Ohio law, so there's not a statute that covers this, so it would be whatever's in board policy would be the governing rule, so.
I would just put it at 60 minutes and not add that, because I think 99% of the time you're going to be fine. I can just think of a couple times where I've seen it put kids in a bad spot. So that's my comment there.
So you're saying just have the 60 minutes?
Right, I wouldn't
Not
put,
the vote to extend?
right, if we want to extend it, we can extend it. Someone can make a motion if it's something we feel like the need to. So.
Okay. Okay. 60 minutes. Is there anything else that we're unclear about? I just wanted to make sure we were very
Great.
clear as you walked
Yeah.
back and tried to fix that. Okay.
Fantastic, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to point out that he did work with our legal counsel on that, just to make sure that it was
Yeah.
legally compliant.
And I appreciate that we did put in there that we don't ask the students to state their address. Thank you. All right. Next up, we have the first reading of policy 412008, and this is employment of personnel for co-curricular, extracurricular activities. And Mr. Cooper, welcome back.
Yeah, good evening once again. Policy 4120.08 and actually policy 4121, they are related here, these two items. They do include revisions due to the new state requirement for non-licensed employees who regularly interact with our students to enroll in the state's RAPBAC system. While the process for getting all of our current non-licensed individuals registered in the system has been a big effort, and I really appreciate the work of some of our HR team, we appreciate the focus on the safety for our students and staff with this requirement. Once an employee enrolls in the system, they are associated with our school district. In the event that an employee is charged with a crime in the state of Ohio, the district receives notification from the state. It is recommended that the board approve the changes to these policies as presented. Any questions I can help with?
Can you just explain for the public what the RAPBAC system is, please?
Yeah, so we connected to a rap sheet, and so if someone is charged with a crime, arrested, and what that system does is it goes through the criminal system and it hits the RAPBAC system, in which then we get notification that an employee has been arrested and charged with a crime. And so that way we can then intervene. Oftentimes that could lead to us putting out somebody on paid administrative leave, at which time the whole purpose of that is we don't assume guilt until there's actually something that takes place from there with a trial or with those charges being, the person being found convicted of those crimes, and or potentially not convicted of those crimes, in which then we can release that person back to work. The whole point of it is really based on just ensuring safety to our students with people who regularly interact with our kids. So this has been something that has not been required in the past. Any licensed individual, which includes teachers, coaches, volunteer coaches, have had this requirement. They've been in this situation, but as far as bus drivers as well, they have also been part of this system. The system did experience a change when the State Board of Education and the Ohio Department of Education workforce were split from the Ohio Department of Education. And so there was a transfer process for all of our bus drivers, but then non-licensed individuals otherwise, custodians, secretaries, others who regularly interact with our students don't have any reason to have a license per the requirements of the state, and therefore weren't in the system prior.
And can you confirm that if someone is charged with a crime out of state, right? This is the state's RAPBAC system, but that also.
So it is the state's RAPBAC system, and so the process would go through our state.
Mark, I just want to clarify, our employees are already background checked every 5 years. We've been doing that. This is just that more instantaneous notification from the Bureau of Criminal Investigations.
Yeah, and every employee has to go through
Yes.
a background check. So I should further clarify that. Every employee that works for the district or volunteers in a capacity within our students, even those who volunteer within their classrooms of students, are background checked in some way. And so there are state requirements around those background checks for all employees, and we do make sure that we follow all those requirements, including a 5-year renewal of those background checks.
And I just want to mention this was a massive lift for our Human Resources Department and supervisors and, all the people around the district. And we also did not receive any additional state funding for this new requirement that we have, just throwing that out there.
The requirement was pretty quick. From the time that the law came into place, it then required the State Board of Education to have to create a system. We actually got to be part of that. Carly Collins and I, as the Director of HR, were part of working with the state as a handful of HR directors across the state to work through what the system would look like. So we did get a little bit of a peek behind the curtains on some things and try to help with and giving them some feedback to make this a pretty smooth process. But we did have a little over 600 employees that we had to get into the system. We have about 500 of those already processed at this point. We have until the end of December, so we're well on track, being that this just started back in September timeframe, I think it was, Ms. Collins. Yeah, so it's been a process for us, but we're thankful. I want to especially thank Wanda Myers within our HR department. She has had multiple sessions working with our bus drivers, working with some of our other staff members in making the process work and associating them with the district. So our drivers didn't have to go through another background process as much as they had to then still create an ID with the system and then associate themselves with our district. So there were tens and tens of maybe 100 hours associated with this process, just with Wanda Myers, especially within our HR department, and then again, Ms. Collins here, who oversees our classified staff. So appreciate all of their efforts.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Next up is the first reading of Policy 8405, Environmental Health and Safety Issues. Welcome, Ms. Dennis.
Good evening, President Meyer, members of the board, Superintendent Hamburg, and Ms. Marshall. The update to Policy 8405, Environmental Health and Safety Issues, removes the line referring to administrative guideline as the policy is inclusive of the information. This was done after recent efforts by our team to make sure that we had all administrative guidelines that were referenced if they were needed, and it was determined by the team that this one was not. I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions? Okay. Thank you so much. Next up, we have a very interesting policy, first read, of Policy 8451, which is head lice. Welcome, Ms. Santa.
Yeah, that's right. Good evening, President Meyer, members of the board, Superintendent Hamburg, and Mrs. Marshall. Yes, for your consideration, it's just a really small update to Policy 8451. It's going to allow us just a little bit more flexibility when it comes to these cases and how to keep kids in school and still get them what they need. Happy to answer any questions for clarification.
So it's my understanding that this also allows some flexibility when, say, maybe a parent is working out of the city and is unable to get to their child to pick them up in the immediate action, right?
Sure, and so just so, for the sake of head lice, right, when you hear that, it doesn't feel very good.
Mm-hmm.
However, right, we really try and look at how Department of Health, CDC, research-based practices on what is the impact of head lice. It's not enjoyable, we don't want it all over our schools, but it's also not a health hazard, right? It is not a contagious situation. So we'll mitigate, we'll do everything we can, but if we need to keep that child in class for a couple hours while we're waiting for a parent to arrive, or if the parent can't get there for any extenuating circumstance, we're not going to make it even worse for the child with a language that says immediately.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, next up is first reading of pre-K through 2 ELA course of study. Welcome, Ms. Toma.
Good evening, President Meyer, members of the board, Mrs. Marshall, and Superintendent Hamburg. I'm back again. Last year I updated you that this state had decided that we needed to use a ELA curriculum from an approved list, and so I let you know that list came out in the winter of last year. We've been hard at work trying to figure out what we were doing in terms of next steps. So we did meet the requirement with 3.5 with Wit and Wisdom. We did not meet the requirement in K2, which I had shared last year. And so we have a teacher committee that has been working since August, meeting twice a month. So I do want to thank all of those teachers who have been coming in after hours to do this work. And they have selected Wit and Wisdom as our core ELA from the approved curriculum list. So that is reflected in the revised courses of study in order to meet the new legislative requirement for K2. Well, PK to 5 ELA is the legislative requirement. I'm updating on K2. I'll be back with preschool again soon.
Any questions or comments?
Just wonder, how many teachers participated?
There were over 25. It kind of depended on the night. There were a couple night events with conferences that we didn't have everybody there. But we had 100% with Curriculum Council in favor of Wit and Wisdom, and it did win out overall. We broke it down by grade levels. I really did try to study where everybody was at in the group, and they wanted to go with Wit and Wisdom.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah.
I was just going to also add a thank you to those teachers because they were not like paid overtime for that, right? They just showed up to volunteer.
No, they do get paid at the
Oh, they
Schedule
do?
S rate to be
Oh,
here
okay.
after hours.
Well, that's good.
Yes,
That's
they
good that they-
deserved that pay because they were here late and they were tired and we worked
Yes.
really hard, really fast.
Well, good. I am actually glad to hear that because having to volunteer for extra stuff is never fun when you want to go home.
Agree.
I think this question might be for maybe Ms. Marshall more, but for those, I think about how when I was in school, we had books, right? We had hard physical books that every once in a while they get updated. But when you think about our technology and they have licenses, and that's a cost, right? That we have to pay every couple of years, and that's for all of our like Wit and Wisdom, all of our various
History,
curriculum.
science, everything
Yeah.
has a digital license component so that
But
teachers
there are
have.
actual materials
There
as
are,
well.
yes.
Consumable materials that are part of that as well. Yeah.
And I
Just
think we
lots
had
of
some
costs
dialogue that
involved.
it's pretty comparable now. So when the digital resources first came out, they were actually quite a bit cheaper than the print resources, but now it's pretty
course.
comparable.
Because they want to get their money in, right? So, thank you. So I see you're also up here for K through 5 science course of study.
I am. The resource we use for our science instruction K-5 is Mystery Science, and Mystery Science made some updates to their resources. So we did need to go back and just revise the course of study. There are things like lesson name changes, moving things within units. No major changes took place, but it was enough that we needed to update the pacing guide. And in full transparency, we wanted to bring it back to the board so that it could be posted publicly for people to review.
Any questions or comments? All right, thank you so much. Thanks to all the teachers, too, that participated. Next up is standing business, and this is also a fun part of the night where we can appreciate our donors. And so may I have a motion to approve the donations as presented?
So moved? Second.
Ms. Marshall?
Yes, so this month, our current request value is $37,561.28. That brings our current fiscal year to date to $161,532.50. Super thankful for our generous community.
Any questions or comments? All right, take the vote.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Leban?
Yes.
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes. And next, may I have a motion to approve the early graduate candidates who have completed all local and state requirements?
So moved.
Second.
Welcome, Ms. Baldwin.
Good evening, President Meyer, members of the board, Superintendent Hamburg, Ms. Marshall. We have 2 candidates for your consideration this evening who will be completing their graduation requirements before their cohort does later this spring, or even we have a class of 2026 student that would be completing their requirements this school year. And this gives them an opportunity to take their diploma when they've met those requirements, and then they can choose to walk in May and take their diploma then, and then still would have their transcript available for any post-secondary plans that they have. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Congratulations to them.
Thank you.
Okay, take the vote. Yeah.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Leban?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes, and may I have a motion to approve the payment in lieu of transportation for 2 students for the 2023-2024 school year?
So moved.
Good evening.
And Tracy second.
I'm so sorry. I got excited.
Welcome back, Ms. Dennis.
Be hanging out here for a minute. So Good evening. As you all know, Ohio Revised Code allows for public schools to determine impracticality of transportation after a consideration of a number of factors, including but not limited to the cost of providing transportation and the number of students receiving transportation. The Department of Logistics, Purchasing and Logistics has evaluated the two listed students per the requirements of Ohio Revised Code and declared the students impractical to transport. Approving this resolution will allow the district to offer payment and load transportation in the manner provided for by Ohio Revised Code at the rate set for by the Ohio Department of Education Workforce for the 23-24 school year. It is being recommended that the Board of Education approve this payment in lieu. Any questions?
I just have a quick question. This is for the 23-24 school year?
That is correct.
Okay.
While the student forms were not received in time to process them prior to the closure of the FY24.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Mrs. Liebman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes. And may I have a motion to approve the resolution to approve purchases of school buses?
So moved.
Second.
And welcome again, Ms. Dennis.
Good evening again, President Meyer, members of the board, Superintendent Hamburg, and Ms. Marshall. Ohio law requires the board to pass a resolution to purchase school buses. The current capital improvement plan includes a 14-year replacement plan for our school buses. These 12 buses were part of the Meta Consortium bus bid. A total of 38 districts participated in the consortium bid. Cardinal Bus Sales was identified as the lowest responsible bidder that met our specifications, which includes a propane engine. These 12 buses will be equipped with integrated safety seats to serve identified students with special needs, like our preschool students. That doesn't mean that we will not be adding safety seats to them. They do come equipped with those. This specification was added with the most recent school bus purchase this past year. For the 12 buses on this resolution, the total is 1,700,554 buses. I will note that we have filed for an EPA grant for 5 of the 12 buses that may provide up to $30,000 per bus, or a total of $150,000 in total alternative funding if we are approved. We do not know at this time. And for another interesting note, in FY20, a bus purchase cost us $85,894 per bus, and today in FY25, a bus purchase costs us $140,872. So approving this resolution allows us to order the 12 buses with an anticipated build schedule of 180 days. This allows for the anticipated delivery of these buses in the summer of 2025, and they are a long lead time. Do you have any questions?
I'm just curious when we'll find out about the USC or the Ohio EPA grant.
I do not have a time frame for that at this time. I can find out.
Any questions? Okay, seeing none.
Mrs. Liebman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes. Oh, thank you. Okay, next up are public comments. And I just want to just remind everyone that we welcome, as the Board of Education, public comment on educational interests, issues of interest to our school community. The board does not discriminate based on the identity or viewpoint of the speaker during our public participation. However, the board president may limit comments that are obscene, abusive, or harassing. In an attempt to protect the privacy interests of our students, the boards ask that speakers not identify students by name during their comments. Persons having public complaints about district personnel, programming, or operations will be referred to the process set forth in Board Policy 9130. Finally, the board reminds speakers that their statement should be directed to the board as a whole and not to individual board members. Again, each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the board. A timer will be shown on the screens. Mr. Doran will call time when 5 minutes has elapsed. And our first speaker this evening is Ms. Peg Duffy. Welcome.
I'll preface my intended comments with some things based on what I heard earlier. To the best of my recollection, it was 28 years ago that the last invocation was given at school board. It was given by Reverend Mark Gowan, who had just arrived in town from Naperville, Illinois, as pastor of First Presbyterian Church. And it's been a while because he retired this past June. Several years ago, I asked Greg Rebrands, for a different reason, not school-related, to go back in the records and find out for me when, we knew approximately when, but why the school board no longer used an invocation. And he couldn't find anything in the minutes. Best I know there. I never thought I would say this, that it's always been, I told the city council that they need to go to school board to find out how to do things. Certainly when we're talking about complying with the Sunshine Law. You guys do a lot better job on that. I will have to say, though, just to tell you, they sign up as city council, minutes are 3 minutes, comments are 3 minutes, and you sign up, you state your name when you begin your comments, but you don't have to state your address. However, you must sign up, must be, so I would suggest that. Now to our friends Neola. I feel very comfortable with the things that I'm hearing from all of you on board, that you will deal with their draconian phrasing and adapt it to who we are, not be who they are. I support the requirement for anybody who's addressing the board be, I'm calling it residency, being related to our community. I would say it was 15 years ago that there was someone from a very conservative district in southwestern Ohio who came to our board and addressed us, trying to influence our curriculum. And this was before we were a polarized world. And so I think that's essential. The revised time limiting, at first is kind of intimidating when you've been accustomed to 5 minutes. You no longer can speak extemporaneously. You have to start learning to use your notes. Glad that you have the timing displayed as you do. City Council has just gone to a timing. I'd be standing here talking, and two seats, rows behind Mr. Dorn is where the timing is. So this is easy to see as you're speaking. I support 2 sections of public comments and suggest maybe adding to the agenda so that you don't have to read the entire line each time, section, President. Some of you have served on a board that's been very cooperative. Some of you who served on a board that was obviously divided and quite contentious. But I would ask you to look at all the suggested revisions kind of as a devil's advocate. One thing that I think needs to be addressed in writing, in policy, before the situation comes up, and that is, what if we have a situation where we have whatever limitations, even if it's an hour, pro-con speakers, how are you going to ask the people to come up? We need somebody who's speaking in favor and somebody opposed. But in general, as much as I often frustrated by Neola, I think that your consideration of some of these suggestions will move us forward quite well.
Thank you. Next up, we have Andre Washington. Welcome.
Thank you. To the board president, Vice President, Superintendent, Madam Treasurer, and board members. My name is Andre Washington, and I am the representative of the 2 OPSI units, 719, the transportation, and 138, which is the custodians, maintenance, and food service workers. So my purpose for rising today is to introduce myself. You have a new superintendent, you have some new board members, so we have a good working relationship with the administration, but it's always good to have a good working relationship with the board. Not direct dealing with the board, because I know right now administration is saying, you ain't supposed to direct deal, no. But just have a good working relationship with the board so we're comfortable in coming to board meetings if we have a concern, or I'm a big fan in, if there's something good going on, then we need to let you guys know. So it's not when we come here, it's always something bad that we want to say. So I want to first start out by saying thank you for approving that MOU. That is wonderful. That's going to help our people out. And then it's going to help you guys out with some of the comments that someone said earlier. If he would have stuck around, he would have known that we were going to vote on early retirement. But I do want to point out something, because one of the previous speakers, I ran out in the hallway and I just addressed him and I told him that some of his comments were right on point. I agree with some of your comments, but I do want to point out one comment when he was talking about bringing the kids' reading levels and everything up. That may not work with our people because we have the support staff. So when people have comments and suggestions about pay, which they need to know what collective bargaining is, because you can't just give the board a suggestion on pay. You got to negotiate that with the union. But also take into consideration the support staff, because it takes a village to raise these kids. And kids can't learn unless they get to school safely. Kids cannot learn on an empty stomach that our food service workers prepare for them. And our custodians, they don't just clean the building, they place safety and security. They're the first ones to notice if a kid is wearing the same clothes. Maybe he's homeless. Maybe there's something that we can do. I need to tell a social worker or something, there's something going on. So we play a very important role in bringing and raising these children, these babies. So I'm here today to let you know that the unionists want to work with you, not against you. We want to work together and not apart. Because when someone's looking for a home, they look to see if the public school is viable. And we want to make sure that if they're looking for a home, that this community here is the first place they look, the first and only place they look. And the only way we can do that is by working together and not apart to make sure that the district looks good to the public. And again, my job is to represent the employees, but my job is also to work with you guys, because if we don't have a good school system, we don't have the children, we don't have the community, then we don't have employees and none of us have a job. So I just want to say thank you. We look forward to working with you. And I have 1 minute and 40 seconds left. I have to point this out. So I was out of town a couple of weeks ago, and whenever I'm out of town, I always visit, I always go to church. It's something my grandmother instilled in me. I go to church wherever I'm at. And so I was at church, and the pastor was talking about some things that they want to do, and he was trying to get someone to volunteer, and he said, I'm going to appoint a woman, because if I want it done, and I want it done right, I always put women in charge. And I don't know if anybody else noticed what they see up here, but what I see up here is Westerville is in good hands with this diverse group of very strong, positive women. I want to say thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Russ Harrington. Welcome back.
Good evening, President Meyer. First, Superintendent Hamburg, Nicole, board members. I'd like to start out by saying I was at the last meeting, and I was appalled by the way you were all treated, and my blood pressure. I was angry. We can have a disagreement and we can have a conversation, but we can do it with respect. And there wasn't one of you that was treated with respect at that meeting. You know, instead of saying everything that you're doing wrong, and Nicole, I think your presentation was awesome. You know, we need to look at the facts of, and I started digging because I do sit on the finance committee with Nicole. And like I said, I am the president of 719. I started looking at how public schools were formed originally. And originally, most of the funding come from the federal government because, well, you know, common sense doesn't apply in Ohio, but it does where I come from in Minnesota. And that's where the most revenue base was coming from. The second largest revenue base was the state. The third is corporations, but today, we're building millionaires' warehouses to make millions of dollars. And what's suffering? Our schools, our taxpayers. Lastly was the taxpayers. They were supposed to carry the least of the burden because owning a home was the American dream. This is what we need to get back to. This is what we need to start a conversation on, and this is what we need to bring the community in on. The community and the board need to unite, and we need to go down to the Capitol. I won't say that word. And we need to let our voices known. Because if we don't unite, as long as they keep us divided, they're going to win. And this first gentleman, I think he should buy a very big car because he might need to be hauling a lot of kids to school. I want to note that our bus drivers and our mechanics work exceptionally hard for this district. A lot of them, on a daily basis, haul 1 to 2 loads more than their contracted run. And they do it, sorry, not for the money, we're not getting rich, contrary to what people think. They do it because they love the district. They do it because they love the kids. And so we need to spend our efforts and energy on a conversation that makes sense. And what makes sense is all of us to join together against the legislatures and put things back to the way they were. Because right now they're completely upside down. And corporations, how much is enough? You know, Rockefeller was once asked that question, how much is enough? And he had over $968 million in the bank at the time. He said, $1 more. And that's where the corporations are at. They want the wealthy to get educated. They want to take the taxpayers' money and give it to private schools. You know, the American dream was you can sacrifice and earn whatever you want. You can choose your destiny and your kids' destiny. But I missed the part where it said you can get it all handed to you for free at the cost of someone else. And that's what's happening right now. If the public schools were funded in a way that it wasn't costing if the private schools were funded in a way that wasn't costing the public schools, you know, that could be a conversation that everybody could get behind. But it isn't about competition. It's about elimination. And that's what you're faced with. And if we don't rise up and fight, the public school is going to be something you read about in a book. I'd like to thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have board comments. So who would like to go first?
I would just like to thank everyone present. Thank you for coming out tonight and providing their remarks. Over the last few weeks, well, really past few months, I've had the opportunity to tour several schools. And in each opportunity, I've had a moment where I've connected with the staff or a leader or a student who shared something really incredible happening in the schools. And so I just wanted to take a couple of minutes today to kind of bring to your attention a few of the needs in the schools so that we're all aware. The first is at Blendon Middle School. Mr. Harris, who is the principal, brought to my attention that they have actually partnered with Sequoia Lanes to support their Renaissance program. And what they're hoping to do is get community members to donate cereal boxes so that their students can go on a field trip and skate at a very reduced price. And so if this is something you're interested in supporting, please reach out to Mr. Harris at Blendon Middle School. And all the donations received will be sent to or provided to Northland's food pantry. The next is Hawthorne Elementary School. Our incredible principal, Mr. C., is seeking donations of 3 bicycles for his students. To learn more about how you can support him in that effort, please reach out. And then I just wanted to support a true star in the Amherst community, Miss Ashley Patel. I recently discovered that she has generously volunteered her Tuesdays and Thursdays to restock and organize a free store in the school with the help of amazing students. And so I just thought that was so wonderful. And I really just want to take a couple of minutes again to highlight all the amazing things happening in our buildings. I know we come here every night and we have very hard conversations and it's very distracting, but I just want you all to leave tonight knowing all of the amazing things happening in our buildings and across the district and community at large. Thank you.
I just want to pop back to our A+ award winners and congratulate them. I love that we do this twice a year. So many people give so much every day. And I just want to plant the seed that all of you out there should be thinking about who you might nominate for the next round of A-plus award winners that'll be coming around in the spring. And, you know, nominations from staff, parents, they're all so welcome. It is truly a special thing when you see a nomination from a student. So I'm just going to say, students out there, think about who in your school makes your life better every day and consider nominating them. So thank you.
I'll echo that as well, Jen. Huge thank you to the A-plus award winners. It is really incredible what the teachers and staff of this district do. And the gentleman who was speaking said they're not doing it for the money. That is definitely true. So they are in it for the kids, and we thank you for that. I just wanted to say happy early Thanksgiving to everyone. Hope you all have a great holiday.
Just real quick, thank you to our OCOS team. Thank you for recognizing them. I know that was a tough journey, and we appreciate all their time and effort that they put into that. Thank you to our A-plus winners and those that nominated them. It's always nice when someone recognizes your hard work. And I just want to wish everyone a nice holiday break, some time off to relax and get ready to come back and hit it.
I'm going to echo my colleagues' comments and just, again, thank everyone. There is something that I think we should be paying attention to as well, and it's House Bill 407. It was introduced by Representatives Gail Manning, a Republican from North Ridgeville, and Bill Seitz, a Republican from Green Township. It would have required private schools to establish a report card so that public and private schools could be compared. It also would have required more transparency in public funds being provided to private schools through vouchers. Last week, the House Primary and Secondary Education Committee accepted a substitute version of the bill, and the substitute bill included elimination of requirements for EdChoice scholarship students to take state or national assessments, removal of language mandating voucher recipients meet state requirements for graduation, removal of the provision that would have required chartered non-public schools to provide accounting for the use of state-provided funds accepted under the EdChoice Scholarship Program, removal of the requirement that chartered non-public schools report information about family incomes, and creation of a procedure for admission when students apply to a private school lacking capacity. So some of the stuff that Nicole or Ms. Marshall showed us earlier, you know, like there's no real requirements for public or private schools. These two representatives introduced a bill to change that, but during that committee process, much of it was stripped away. So I would encourage you to call your state representatives and your state senators and talk to them about the need for to put those provisions back in to the bill. I think it's also really important to remember as we think about this funding situation that we find ourselves in, that it does matter who we elect to the State House. While I never, when I talk to people, I would never say that you should be a single issue voter, but public schools is one piece of that puzzle. So do your research, dig in a little bit, and see where your state reps are, or state senators are, and have conversations with them. And just thank you to the people that came out and provided public comments. That's all I have. So the board will meet in regular session on Monday, December 16th, 2024 at 6 p.m. at the Early Learning Center, which is here, but 936 Eastwind Drive, Westerville, Ohio, 43081. And may I have a motion to suspend Robert's Rules of Order for item 16.01 so we can enter into a work session?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Marshall?
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Levan?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes. All right.
his way. Yeah. Yeah, he's riding the go bus tomorrow night. That's nice. It's so great. We pay $10. He's riding with a friend, and it makes me nervous. That's why I keep checking my phone. I'm like, they were supposed to leave hours ago. Oh.
Taking me out.
So I'm going to throw out here, it's 8:15. I'm not saying you, I'm just like,
It's late. So I put together a short presentation for the board I'd like to go through for this part of the work session. And then I know Mrs. Hamburg and Mr. Dorn and team have some things to share with you. So we failed the ballot issue, which means no additional operating funds through property taxes from an approved levy at this time. So I wanted to look at the current 5-year forecast and kind of talk through some scenarios and just sort of talk through what our current situation is, and then some scenarios to potentially move forward and what that looks like. And so, let me turn this on, might be helpful. I do want to mention that the following slides are estimates for illustrative purposes only. There are several variables that will affect the outcome of both revenues and expenditures when we're projecting out a 5-year period. I mentioned we have 2 new state biennium budget cycles that are part of that 5-year period, and then all the things that go with that. So I just want to throw that out there. And so what I did is I took our current forecast, and there's so much in that one sheet on a forecast. I wanted to sort of condense it down and show just what I find important when I'm evaluating our current financial situation. So this is our current forecast that the board just approved earlier in the meeting. In that first line there, we're looking at fiscal year 25 through 29 is on the forecast, and then I put 2030 out there as a reference point, because as we're talking about if we're talking about a potential future ballot initiative, as we get into the end of this fiscal year and go into the new fiscal year, we will have 2030 on a future forecast. So I just want to have it out there as a frame of reference. And so the revenues over or under expenses, that is the difference between how much revenues are projected and how much our expenditures are projected. And you can see we are deficit spending, what we consider deficit spending. So we're spending more than the revenues coming in every year of the 5-year forecast at a pretty significant amount. as we're seeing those ESSER funds expire and the expenditures come back to the general fund. And then our unreserved fund balance as of June 30th. So this is a projection of what that will be as of June 30th of 2025 and all the way through 2029. And then again, year 30 there as a reference. Excuse me. And then our unreserved fund balance equivalency in days. And so that is what our policy is. Our policy says 90 days for each year of the rolling 5-year forecast period. So you can see in 27, we're at 87 days, so we're close to the 90, but then we're pretty far away from it in the years past there. And then you can see in dollars what our target unreserved fund balance is based on projections for each of those 5 years. And then I speak everything in terms of millage because, again, our only way to raise revenues is through property tax millage or an income tax, which this community has tried in the past and nobody was excited about that. So property taxes, I speak in terms of millage. So that first line there, revenues over or under expenses, what is the deficit spending millage equivalent? So for fiscal year 25, our deficit spending is $16.9 million. And based on our current property values, we would need 3.97 mils in property taxes to make up that 16.9 million. And so for 2026, at 29.1 million, we would need 6.79 mils to make up that deficit spending. And when I am reviewing a 5-year forecast projections, and I'm looking at the deficit spending, and I'm working to make a recommendation to the board, I would typically look at what is the average millage equivalent of that deficit spending throughout the 5-year forecast period. And I weight the first 3 years differently than I weight the last 2 years of the forecast, because the first 3 years we feel pretty good about in terms of projections. The last 2 years, I'm less confident in what that's going to look like, right? So we weight that, and then we come up with a weighted average for those for that estimate for recommendation to the board. And that's how we arrived at the 4.9 mil operating levy that was on the ballot in November that did not get passed by voters. So this is where we sat currently. We are at an unreserved fund balance of negative 63 days or $47.3 million. As I mentioned, in order for us to sign that certificate of available resources, we can't go past June 30. This would be June 30 of 28, because that is what our forecast shows in terms of an available unreserved fund balance. Any questions about that before? Because they all look like this, just so you know. And the board, you do have a copy of these tables in front of you if you want to sort of go back and forth. I just want to make sure that we had them up here on slides also. So this is the current forecast as the board has approved it. And then the very next slide is our current forecast if we transfer the $30 million back to the general operating account. I had recommended a transfer to a capital projects account to allow us to keep the bond millage at a no new millage ask for the community so that we wouldn't have to raise property taxes further than what was needed. And so given that the ballot issue has failed, I am recommending that the board move the $30 million back into the operating fund, because as we are quickly depleting our cash balance, our fund balance, I believe that we're going to need that in order just to sustain a lot of things. So I am making that recommendation. If the board agrees with that, I'll have a resolution on the December 16th board agenda to make that transfer back. It's not included in the current forecast because I haven't had this conversation with the board yet, and I don't have the board's approval for that transfer yet. So, but it would be included in any spring update if the board approves that. Are there any concerns about that? Okay. So you can see the net effect of this. So I just want to point out So we're showing not deficit spending here, but that's just because the transfer in is considered a revenue in this calculation, but we're still, for our normal expenses and revenues, we are deficit spending, projected to be deficit spending by a little over $16 million this year. And then it doesn't change anything else in terms of the rest of the years other than the unreserved balance increases. So instead of negative 47.3 million, we're now negative 17.3 million in the unreserved balance forecast for 2029. So still negative by about 23 days, or and for that deficit spending at 58.5 million in that last year, it's the equivalent of 12.82 mils in terms of property taxes. Any questions before I move on? All right. So, just want to make sure it's clear. Every scenario we're looking at from this point forward is assuming that we are moving the 30 million back into the general operating account. And so I want to take a look at what the effect of an operating levy that would be passed in calendar year 2025, first collection year 2026, would look like on the forecast with various millage amounts. So if we look at a 4.9 mil operating levy, which is what was on this past November, it's projected to generate $20.8 million. So we generate about $4.2-ish million on each mill of property taxes based on our current assessed values. And so if a property levy is passed, an operating levy is passed in calendar year 2025, first collection year 2026, that's a calendar year, so we operate on fiscal years. So what that means is that we will see a half-year collection in fiscal year 2026, so that's January 1 through June 30, 2026, and then a full year collection beginning in fiscal year 2027. So that's what this forecast includes. So that 20.7 million, half of that in 26, all of that in 27 and beyond, each year beyond. And you can see what that does to those numbers and where that puts us in that unreserved balance. Again, this is with the 30 million transferred back. And then the unreserved fund balance in terms of days. And I do want to keep an eye on that 2030 year as we're working through this. And then our targeted unreserved fund balance. And then our deficit millage equivalent for each year with the deficit spending. So the other thing I sort of want to talk through on this slide is for terms of collecting revenue, it makes no difference whether it passes in May of 25 or November of 25. Collections are going to begin in January of 26 in calendar year 26 regardless. That makes no difference. What does make a difference is our planning, our ability to plan. If we have a ballot issue in May, whether it passes or doesn't, we know what we have to work with going into the next school year. If we do not have one on in May, and then we're looking at November, that's a whole nother school year we have to plan for without additional operating funds and not knowing where we are with future opportunities for operating funds. And then if there is nothing in 25, then that's, we're back to the original forecast where we have to make up that shortfall. So does that make sense?
Yeah, but we'd still have to plan for the austerity measures, right? So
yes, so let's go through the scenarios. Yep. So as we look at, if you go back to the current forecast, sorry, I have all my lovely slides here with the 30 million. Our revenues are less than our expenses by 29 million in 26, 39.9 million in 27, 49.2 million in 28, and 58.5 million. The 5-year forecast is assuming, on average of all 5 years, a decrease over that time period of about 0.5% in revenues, as we're projecting diminished fund balance and the decrease in interest earnings that are going into the general operating account. And as we are continuing to look wealthier to the state, we do have some slight increases for property taxes for the update year in 2026 that for the inside, that 3.8 mils of inside millage, and then a small estimate for new construction based on what we've seen historically. And so that is what the projections are showing in the current forecast. So we're subject, it depends on what the state does with the funding formula, right? And it depends on whether we do get additional operating funds, if we can maintain some sort of balance that we can earn interest on, and what interest rates look like, and all of those things. So we take all of that into account. But this forecast assumes a net decrease on average of about 0.5% as those calculators are done at the state, and we continue to look wealthier as a local community. So the state expects our local community to pick up more of the bill. And then on the expenditure side, the forecast assumes around a 6% increase in expenditures year over year. And so that is based on our current budgets that we had approved at the beginning of the year. So what is in our current appropriations? And that also includes placeholders for base increases. So we have 2% base increase in this forecast as a placeholder. We have several contracts that will be up for negotiation during this time period, and so we don't know what the outcome of that will be, but that's what's in the forecast. It also has a placeholder for additional staff, so 5 certified FTE based on a new average higher salary amount and benefits that go with that for 5 certified FTE, and then 1.5 classified. So that's a calculation for a dollar amount as a placeholder as we're looking forward. It also has savings built in of $1 million a year for turnover of our staff. So you heard Mr. Cooper read a very long list of all of the people that are retiring. There were some changes to the retirement system this year. And we have people retire every year, or just people leaving and then someone lower on the scale coming in. And so that changeover and maybe positions that we might be absorbing through attrition and things like that. So that's what's in the forecast currently as we sit here today that was approved by the board. What we've asked our buildings and department leaders to do is to take a look at their current budgets. So like I mentioned, what we have is their current budgets in the forecast, is to take a look and see if they can target a reduction of 20% in the current year. And that for their base going forward. So it's not just a current year reduction, but an ongoing in perpetuity reduction, essentially. Now, I do want to point out not everyone is going to be able to do that. Some budgets just, they are required costs that we have that you just can't adjust your budget that much. For buildings, a lot of our building budgets are based on fees that we collect from families, and so we can't reduce those. We've already collected those fees, so those budgets will remain the same. But we do have a per pupil allocation that we allocate aside from the fees that is being looked at currently, and then our departments and all of their budgets that they are dealing with. Our curriculum team is sort of putting a pause on some studies that they're doing for future curriculum unless it's absolutely needed or absolutely required at the moment. We're having conversations about our technology refresh and the one-to-one implementation and what that looks like. And so those are the kinds of things that we're looking at right now. And I know you have a document that everybody's going to go through, but I just want to make clear that what is in the forecast is the current budget that was approved by the board, and that we haven't made any changes to the forecast based on that. So you can see where we are. If we're not on the ballot, we have revenues and expenses that we need to get in line very quickly before we deplete our unreserved fund balance going forward. if we have a new operating levy of 4.9 mils, that generates 20.8 million roughly annually, half year beginning in 26, full year beginning in 27. We still have a pretty significant deficit that we'll need to work down. Any operating levy that we have, we would plan for 3 years. So if it's on in 25, we would plan to be back on in 28. That would be the hope, and hopefully we could stretch it further beyond that. But if we're back on in 28, that would be collection year, half year in 28 and full year in 29. So just something to keep in mind in how we usually look at property tax levies. So that's 4.9 mils. And then, were you going to say something?
If we're on in 28, it would be a half year in 29 and a full year in 30.
Oh, yes, half year in 29. You're right. I was thinking, yes, it would be, we would be on in 28, first collection year 29, so a half year in 29, full year in 30. Thank you, Angie. I've been back and forth with these all day, so, well, more than all day. So then the same thing for, this is what 5.9 mil operating levy would look like. And you can see where that would put our unreserved fund balance. In year 29, we would be at that 90-day mark, but we'd still be looking at this deficit spending. We'd want to get that in line. And then a 6.9 mil operating levy. And again, we're keeping an eye on that 2030 year. And then a 7.9 mil operating levy. And I just thought I would stop here because I don't think anyone here thinks that we're going to pass a 7.9 mil operating levy. So I just want to show you what, in terms of new revenue, what it would require in order for us to meet that minimum fund balance. And so our target has to be at reducing our growth in our expenditures going forward versus trying to get the millage to make up the difference, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it needs to be a combination of the things. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions we want to walk through with that?
I do have a question. The 2% base increase, how exactly is that specific percentage determined? And then would an increase to 4% make much of a difference on these numbers?
Yes, it would. So we've been historically at around 2.6%. This year it's 2.7%. So the 2% was just put in as a placeholder for projections going forward. I didn't think it would be responsible to assume 0, but without any current negotiated agreements that go out that far, I don't have anything to base it off of.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I should also mention, it's 2% on the base, but this also assumes steps would increase. We would continue to give growth for education, for columns and things like that for our associations that have that, so.
Real quickly, just thinking about the state's GRF budgets, right? So there'll be a new one introduced this February. The governors will come out in end of like February. Legislature will pass, hopefully by July 1st. So then you're looking at that's FY 26, 27, right? So come July, we'll know what it looks like 26, 27. But then I just want people to understand that when you get out to 2029, again, right, we don't know what that GRF budget's going to look like. So I know you've said this once or twice, but can you remind us how you model those that we don't
Yes.
yet know?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. So this forecast assumes the current funding model that we have based on the local capacity calculations going forward. It doesn't assume any increased base costs. So you know how they're using 2022 numbers still. It doesn't assume that those will be updated to anything beyond 2022. And again, every meeting I have been a part of where there's been any state official or any conversation that's been had with state officials, it's all they're saying, don't expect much this budget season. But that's what it's based on, is the current funding model continuing. It also assumes the rollback reimbursements are going to continue, and it also assumes the way property tax law works today continues. And so there's a lot of conversation, and I cannot stress this enough. We receive 64% of our operating revenue from local property taxes and about 27% from the state. Those are our biggest sources of revenue. And when they go messing with property tax law or state funding, it hurts us every step of the way. And so there's lots of opportunities out there for things to shift one way or another that could mean a huge impact to our local community, all while the state continues to put requirements on us, significant requirements that are no small tasks. I mean, it is mind-boggling to me how the state expects us to fix the world's problems, but yet doesn't want to make sure that we're funded in order to be able to do so. So it's just my soapbox.
Yeah, thanks.
And there is a small portion that comes from federal dollars, correct?
Yes.
And that's kind of up in the air, I think, going forward into a new administration based on some of the things that we've heard from.
I have a slide for that.
Oh, perfect.
So there's been a lot of conversation around the Federal Department of Education being abolished, and I've received several questions about this. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands the federal grants that we receive. So these are all entitlement grants, but our fiscal year 2025 allocation, you can see we have a district total here, and then we have a non-public total, because again, we're required to service private schools. And so we have to service their grant funds as well and account for those and do all the things with that. And so in total, the district receives about $7.1 million in the current allocation. Total FTE, so the full-time equivalent of an employee, is about 50.13. And that's what our fiscal year 2025 allocation is. And then we have a 2024 carryover amount. So depending on the grant, you're able to carry over some of the funds if they're not fully spent. And so we have about 7.3 FTE out of there and a little over $1 million. And so that's what we have today based on our student demographics and makeup and what the federal government is funding us. I saw Lieutenant Governor John Husted actually posted on social media recently about how great it would be if the Federal Department of Education went away, and assured whoever his followers are that public schools would not see less funding if that were to happen. They would just hand it down to the states, and then the state would, sort of facilitate all that. So I just want to make sure everybody knows what our funding is today in case that does happen, because I'd like to not see a decrease in that funding, at least, going forward.
So when we talk about the non-public schools, can we talk a little bit about our partnership and talk about the resources that we share? Because I think it's kind of confusing for people to understand that the components that we help with, because it's quite a few.
There's a lot. Who wants to talk about that? Juliet's not here. She's really our person. So.
When you say the resources that we share, you mean people and transportation? Yes, so we do provide transportation, except for when we have payments in lieu, as we had earlier this evening, for efficiency purposes. But we do provide transportation to several private schools or non-public schools in our community. And we do also provide, for example, at St. Paul, we provide a nurse, we provide a reading teacher, we provide a counselor, we provide EL services to a couple of schools in the district, so we do provide services. We do have employees that provide services for the district, or for the non-publics.
Special education does the evaluations.
Yes, special education does the ERTs, the initial evaluations, and if the student resides in the district but still attends the non-public school, we still also provide the IEP services, write the IEP, I should say.
Sure, and that's not just for St. Paul's, it's other schools, right?
We also have, because we have 7 Title I buildings, which are, they get that designation based upon their demographics and economic status of the students. 7 of our elementaries are Title I buildings. Any student that lives within the boundaries of those Title I schools but goes to a non-public and needs reading intervention services, we provide those too. And so that's when you see those non-publics, and we have about 9 this year, non-public schools that we served, and we've got 1 or 2 more that are now have requested title funding from us because they have a couple of our kids.
Yeah, and you mentioned transportation. I just want to highlight that if it's impractical to transport, we still pay.
Yes.
So it's not like, oh, sorry, it's impractical. We're still paying. Okay.
Quick question on the potential abolition of U.S. Department of Education, and that those funds would come to the states then. Is there any guarantee that the states would have to use those funding for public schools?
I
think it's
couldn't
premature
even begin
to
to
even-
guess what they would feel like they would be required to do.
I would just note, they have a large role in special education and civil rights, and so those are 2 areas that, you would be losing a lot of consistency in those areas. And as we look at states having different laws and services.
I think it's would be helpful to mention too, like a lot of the rules that are at the federal level, like special education, are also state laws that have the same sort of requirements. So even if the federal requirements went away, we'd still have the same requirements at the state level.
And we have had parents reach out, so that's a really good point, Nicole. We've had some parents reach out of our students with special needs who are concerned that their children will not get those services. So yes, we have current state law that matches a lot of that, but there's definitely concern that those requirements don't go away, and they're often things that, we believe too that kids need, but that we would lose some of that funding. So it's a big concern.
I think also if they abolish the Department of Education, you'd have to watch each of these individual pieces of legislation to make sure that they aren't also abolished, which then means that the funding allocation doesn't have to flow.
But it is the goal. Right?
That is, yeah.
I mean, they've been very clear about that.
Yeah, it is the goal, yeah.
That is the goal.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Must turn it off, sorry. So I just wanted to throw up what a proposed timeline might look like if the board is considering a ballot issue for May of 2025. We do not have a board meeting calendar set yet for calendar year 2025, so I took a guess on board meeting dates based on what we've done in the past. So resolution of necessity could be considered at the January 13th board agenda, and then resolution to proceed. So in this time, I would file with the county auditor. They would certify amounts and rates based on the information they're given, and then bring it back to the resolution to proceed on the 27th. And the deadline to file for May is February the 5th. That's the same for everybody. And the election day is May the 6th, if there is an election. I want to make sure I mention that. Right now, there is no election in May of next year, so it's an off-cycle year. I have asked the Board of Elections what is the cost if there is no election and we want to be on. He said it's about $3,000 to $4,000 per precinct. So we have about 68 precincts. If you do the math, it could be $200,000 to $272,000, depending on what that is. However, the state of Ohio is considering a ballot initiative for some public works projects that they have for local governments. It's very popular with local governments. And if the state has a statewide issue, then the cost to us is very minimal. It's like a few $1,000s in total because we'd have to pay for printing ballots and things like that. So, but just to note, the state has the same deadline that we have for filing. Although I do feel like the state, the way they move things along, we probably would have a pretty good idea if they're intending to have an election as a statewide ballot issue. So that's May. And then if the board's considering a November 2025 ballot initiative. Again, best guess with board meeting dates, as we haven't established a calendar yet. But I would recommend having a board meeting on June 23rd, and then a resolution of necessity on the board agenda then, and resolution to proceed on July 7th. The deadline is August the 6th, and election day is November the 4th. And we will have an election on November the 4th next fall. So, and I also do want to mention, these dates are based on us not adding a bond issue. This is just for operating. If we were to add a bond issue for a combination or either or like we have in the past, and we needed to seek state consents, then we would have some resolutions we'd need to file in December in order to have all of those worked out in time for the ballot issue. So I just want to put that out there. Okay. That's what I have. What questions do you have for me?
Angie, what are your thoughts?
Well, obviously, Nicole and I have spent a great amount of time discussing this, along with the rest of the team. And at this time, I would recommend that we do move the 30 million back and that we table the bond projects. You know, obviously, we have some aging facilities and some needs that we would like to address. But the greater need with not passing the ballot issue, it was still this month, wow, yeah, a few weeks ago, is that we secure operating funding. And so we did receive some feedback when we were out talking to various groups about the combined issue, and I know we've been successful with that in the past, but in the short term, I think to simplify and just look at operating funds would be my recommendation. Nicole mentioned earlier about the timeline of May versus November, and I would recommend, if you're looking at a 2025 ballot initiative, that you look at May versus November, because I do think I would not be comfortable starting another school year without knowing if we have funding secured for the following year. And it's really hard to cut programming in the middle of a year, obviously, and I don't think any of us would want to do that. So we would need to, in addition to the austerity measures that we're already working on and that we'll continue to work on, we would need to look at an additional round of cuts that would be more significant going into that school year. So I would prefer giving the community an opportunity in May, hopefully there's an election, and being able to give them a list of kind of what we're looking at going into that election.
So if we would go on in May, we still, and move the 30 million back, we still need to make some austerity measures. What amount are we looking at there?
Yeah, so for, if we're on for a 4.9 mil levy, I think we still need to be around $10 million in austerity measures. And that is a very rough estimate because we don't know what state funding will look like. We don't know, there's a lot of things we don't know.
Sure.
Especially right now. But I would be comfortable around $10 million. And then if we're not successful in May, if we're at 4.9 mils, then I would suggest that we have a list of things that are that the board would approve. The auditor states suggesting best practices. If there is any kind of like cut list, that it's board approved
Prior to the election.
prior to the election in May. And then that would be a further round of reductions. And so we have a document here that sort of outlines a process. Are you going to go over that?
So, but let's back up and make sure everyone's clear in hearing what you're saying. So move the 30 million back, potentially go on in May, still make some austerity measures. Before we go on, before the election in May, we would have a list of potential cuts that the board would majority would agree on. And then if the ballot measure passes, we would continue with those austerity measures that we made before, but then the cuts would not happen.
Right. Correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure everyone's hearing the same thing and we're all on the same page.
Yeah, and I think
'Cause
it's pretty
super
clearly
confusing.
defined in this document that we're going to
Okay.
make public so that people can see the process that we're reviewing.
Thank you, I really appreciate that.
So I'm going to share from this document a little bit more information. And as we look to identify potential areas for austerity measures, efficiencies, and reductions to the general fund, The district leadership team will be reviewing staffing, other expenditures, and all fees to provide recommendations to the board to address the projected general fund deficit. Our leadership team will consult with our legal counsel, but also with our association's leadership to ensure processes and requirements in Ohio Revised Code, negotiated agreements, and applicable board policies and guidelines are followed. And so as we start, knowing that we are a large organization that provides services, we'll always look to start with staffing. The staffing review will include staffing allocations for all employee groups, including administrators, our teachers and other WAA members, our AAS members, our WESA, our support team members, our OPSI 138 and OPSI 719 members, as well as our ESCCO staff that provide our instructional aid assistance in our special needs programs. Additionally, we will take a look at all of our supplemental contracts to make sure that what we're offering is still appropriate in this time period. And while we do those things, we will make sure that we pay attention to some very pertinent documents and areas and references, including the Ohio Department of Education's and Workforce's operating standards, legal requirements for programs. So we have some programs that have some legal requirements that we have to follow. All of the negotiated agreements as they exist and as they will be. Our employee licensure and certification areas, because that has an implication on if we have reductions, how those reductions will happen. Employee salary fund types. We have general fund employees, we have grant fund employees, and we have food service fund employees that we'll have to make sure that we are paying close attention to. We'll take a look at comparison data from our similar districts. We do have the fiscal year 22 and fiscal 23 comparison data, but the fiscal year 24 data is anticipated to be coming out here soon in December, which is it's helpful to have the most timely data to review. We're going to take a look at student choices for courses at the secondary level to see how they are enrolling, to make sure that we are making sure that we are as efficient there as we can. We're going to look at report card data because we want to make sure that we aren't taking a look at an area where we may already be a little bit deficient, a little more deficient than another area, so we don't want to have causal effects on that. We're going to take a look at our impact from attrition, as we saw a long list tonight, and then also take a look at our hiring practices when it comes to hiring our teachers or other staff members and experience levels and things like that. So other types of expenditures that we're going to review are our purchase services, materials and supplies, curriculum adoptions. All of these have been mentioned earlier this evening. We're going to take a look at how we're spending money on professional development, our summer programming, and then also how we're using our permanent improvement funds and whether or not they can be used in a different way. And so while we're looking at those, we're going to make sure that, as Ms. Marshall has already shared, that we are looking at all building and department budgets to see where we can find some efficiencies there. We're going to take a look at all of our 5-year planning documents. So we have 5-year planning documents for permanent improvement, for curriculum adoption, for technology. So we'll be spending some time on those. We'll be looking at our vendor supports, applications and services to make sure that all that we have are all that we need, or if we have some that we may no longer need, maybe they become part of this process. And then we also have to take a look at existing contracts. And so when we talk about contracts and vendors, we sign multi-year agreements to make sure that we get the best costs. And so some of those contracts, we might have to, even if we decide we want to eliminate that particular service, we might have to wait some time to do so because of the contract. So our leadership team's also going to review opportunities for increased revenues to offset some of our costs. Our areas to review include pay to participate fees, club and activity fees, class fees, general fees, and facility permitting fees. So for our community that uses our facilities. We'll take a look at our all-day kindergarten tuition to make sure that it's covering the required cost for the program. We believe it is, but we're going to double check just to make sure. And then we're going to make recommendations to the board as tiered groups, which we've already talked about. So those initial level of efficiencies, and then what we would propose to do in the event that we are not on in May, or if we are on in May and are unsuccessful, to start the next school year, and then what would happen if we would not be successful moving forward in November. So we'll present that tiered approach. So we have some items for consideration, areas for review, as we say. So let's just talk about Tier 1, just real quick. Areas that we are going to take particular interest in is reducing and restructuring our district level positions, including administrators. We're going to take a look at our current salaries, wage, and benefit guidelines, reducing our budgets, as we spoke about, from buildings and departments, reducing subscription services for some of our technology vendors, reduce and or defer purchase services, materials, supplies, and equipment, maybe minimally increase fees at this particular point. I'm going to take a look at the general fund turf, transfer to the turf fund, and maybe consider eliminating that and actually sending money backwards. Talk about, have some conversations about moving permissible expenditures to a permanent improvement fund, to, for example, professional technical services, some technology, things like that. Reduce a limited amount of staff, including through attrition, with some impact on core instruction, student choice, and student supports. Reduce the scope for Summer Learning Academy. Reduce supplemental offerings. Review our transportation for more efficiencies, and then still other things to consider. And so while I made this really long list there, this is not actually a list. It's areas that we are going to review. So I just want to make sure that's really clear. But these are the lists for our efficiencies. If we have to move further, then a lot of those items will come back up again, but they will be deeper and more far-reaching effects on our students' overall experience, including that Tier 3, November, no issue passing next year and no collections the following year. That will be much more significant. And so, but as we start to work on these items, we are going to spend a lot of time having some really good critical conversations and some in-depth thought, cross-functional meetings and things like that. We're not going to operate in isolation. We're going to make sure that we work together and make sure that we can support each other through this process so that we can support our students in their experiences as well.
I turned it off, sorry. So as you guys are starting to do all these conversations and knowing we have this timeline too, right? And thinking about we have to make a decision if and when and at what amount we go to the ballot. I'm just wondering, what does that I understand you're talking amongst yourselves and looking for efficiencies. Like, what is that process that you guys are going through other than just talking, and what can we expect potentially and when to start thinking through like what those cuts look like? 10 million isn't small. I mean, it will be felt, I think. And then my other question is I know that we had mentioned that we will seek some public comment, like we would go back to the public. And I'm wondering what that looks like. Could we use maybe, and this is all just off the top of my, the strategic planning committee that was put together and survey the rest of our community, or do we survey the rest of our community? So I'm just thinking about those things. Those things are on my mind.
So when I say that we're going to have some conversations about it, we're going to talk about, we're going to sit down and we're going to look at data. We're going to evaluate that data, and we're going to provide the financial implications of those items that we're having conversations about. We'd actually like to bring some of the ideas back to the board in maybe a potential another work session before you just start seeing things that we are recommending to happen, so we can have some further conversations about some of the items that we're talking about and how the board may value them as well. And so to make sure that we're all in agreement in the direction that we need to go. We are certainly open to having some other participants in terms of providing some feedback. I wouldn't expect that that most people are going to, when we start talking about programs and things like that, that it's going to become very close to them in terms of how they might feel. So we want to make sure that we are able to honor the entire community's thought process on that. So that is something that we're going to have to figure out. But I think we'll hear quite a bit if we do, in fact, generate a list to talk about the post-May, about how people feel about some of the items that are on the list. So there will be plenty of options for some comment, but we can't allow for comment until we give them something to comment on. So I think we need to come back relatively soon for another work session. I mean, that would be my suggestion. And I know that I think that others of us have discussed that, just so that we can bring back some data to you right away and then continually update as we move throughout our normal board cycle.
Yeah, I think that's a key piece. We talked about by the December 16th meeting that we thought we could have, especially in Tier 1, some of those austerity measures, knowing it's not going to be complete as we continue to work through and look at the items on this list, and other things come up, you know, that we may have other opportunities as we put in that last bullet point that we're not even aware of right now. So we think from a Tier 1 standpoint, we would definitely have some information by December 16th. And then in the meantime, we'll be starting to work on that Tier 2 on what are some dollar values, as Scott said, that we can bring back and have some dialogue around. We
Yeah.
also don't want to like rush that. So if we're talking about a list that we're saying, you know, in collaboration with you, that we would be asking you to vote on prior to the May measure, we want to make sure that we are thoughtful and not hasty with that.
Appreciate that. I also know that these board meetings are an opportunity for the public to come and tell us how they feel about it too. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Do we want to look at a potential date for a work session prior to the December 16th meeting? While I have you all here.
Yeah,
We had talked about the prior Monday, the 9th.
the 9th.
If that's an option, no? See, and Louise is saying that's a conflict.
Oh, okay. What about? Yeah, I think
I will make
Any
whatever
date.
you all want work, so.
most people probably would need to have an evening date.
Hmm?
Most people would need to have an evening date. So are we still looking at the week of the 9th, or the week before? You don't really care.
Could do the 11th, the 12th.
I can't do the 11th, but I could do the 12th.
I can do the 12th.
Is it? So the
6
12th.
PM, does that work?
We're used to 6 PMs.
All right, we will get the notice sent out.
I just want to thank you guys for putting all this information together. I do appreciate it. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, I think it's nice that, you know, we have some information, now we can have some time to digest it and come back and have some really good conversation. So
Yeah.
very grateful for all the work. Appreciate all the time. I know it's a tough conversation. I know even thinking about this for you guys is super tough, uncomfortable, not what we wanted to do. Really appreciate it.
Is there any additional information or things we hadn't thought about that would be helpful for you to have between now and then? That you can think of, or you can obviously let us know if you think of things, but I just want to throw that out there. I'm sure everybody's heads are spinning a little.
Yeah, this is something that definitely keeps me up at night. Thank you. All right. You good?
I just wanted to make a note that that document will be shared out. Angie, I think you're sending something out tomorrow. Is that right, with this document?
And we wanted to share out, obviously, we've had a lot of questions from
Yeah.
staff, so we just wanted to wait until we had an opportunity. As we've shared with many people who've asked, we hadn't even had a chance to meet with all of you since the election, so wanted to share that out and be transparent about
Thank
our
you.
process.
That's
So this will go to the staff then?
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense.
I would just ask, can you make clear, so the tier 1 areas for review, that's the efficiencies and
Yeah.
like that work is happening now?
Yeah, that's a
Right.
good call out.
Yep.
And if we're comfortable putting the target on there, that might be helpful, but I just want to be clear that that's the work that's happening now, that will go on anyway. Thanks.
Okay. I forgot about this. May I have a motion to enter into executive session for the purposes of discussing the employment and compensation of public employees? Or do we need to reinstate the rules of order? Do we need to reinstate the rules of order?
No, because you only approved it for that specific
Okay.
agenda item.
Okay. So may I have a motion to enter into executive session?
So moved.
Second.
All right.
And it's for the purposes of discussing
Yes,
employment.
I read that.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, just making
once
sure.
already.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mrs. Levan,
Yes.
Mrs. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer.
Yes, you're welcome to stay if you want to stay till like whenever, but we're going to head into executive session now.
It's 9:08. Nope, we're just back. It's 9:50 PM.
Okay, we are back from executive session, and may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Who seconded that? I'm sorry. Jen
Saltman. Yep.
Mrs. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mrs. Levan,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer.
Yes. We're adjourned.